This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I am going to narrate what if Naruto ran away from Valley of the End and was trained by Kyuubi. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
He lay in my white hospital room thinking sadly, I failed. He had not succeeded. Terribly. Sakura would always be upset with him for this. It didn't matter, though. Eventually, she would move past it. He wasn't simply beaten, though. He was ruined. No, while he lay defenseless in the dirt, unconscious, Sasuke managed to escape. Naruto had just woken up and was still a little dazed. He moaned as he turned to face his bedside table. He was still in pain, too. A bottle of sake bearing a note addressed to Oscar Mayer was the only object the ship noticed. Who is that? They must have been given the wrong room. No, get well, cards, no flowers, nothing. Wait a minute, no, the table was engraved with the word, demon. Alright, so he was visited. As an afterthought, he added, I'll need to get that guy's address so I can beat the crap out of him. Or her. He glanced around the room and saw that no one else was there. He had a window and a door with a window, and he could see from the wire passing through them both that the glass was bulletproof and unbreakable. How kind of them? No 10-inch titanium steel door with a time lock or steel walls. Someone is making a mistake, he thought sourly. Naruto turned up the bottle, thinking, oh well, it didn't taste too bad, but it did burn my throat a little. As he drank himself into a silent oblivion and returned to unconsciousness, he thought, Naruto can almost see why Ba-chan liked this stuff so much. His final clear thought before the blackness from the corner of his eye overtook him was, note to self. I can't handle alcohol. He woke up in knee-deep water. The boy got up, glanced around, and then realized where he was. I've got to get my mind out of the gutter. He laughed a little at my joke and began to walk in search of his destination. At last, he located the all-powerful Kyuubi's room. When Naruto intervened, he saw right away that something was amiss. There were no bars. To his right, a voice said, Konnichiwa Kit. When he looked, he saw what appeared to be a female human, Kyuubi, wearing a Santa hat. 9 tails were swaying slightly, and his ears protruded from 2 holes cut in the hat. He placed a hat similar to his on Naruto's head and said, and Merry Christmas while I'm it. Why do you look like a girl, Kyuubi? As Naruto jerked the hat off his head and long hair fell from the Kyuubi's head, he yelled, I do not look like a girl. How dare you insult the all-powerful? Crap. He was left staring. All right, so I'm a girl. Do you have any issues with that? The young boy couldn't stop staring at him. Her. He was obviously upset that a transvestite was living inside him, but he couldn't help but look down at her beauty. She was slightly smaller than Tsunade, so she wasn't sickeningly large, but she wasn't like Sakura. Naruto then realized that we were about the same height, and he saw that she was about an inch taller than me. Her hair, which fell to just below her shoulder blades, was blood red, and her tails were the same color, with white tips. She smiled and said, Are you going to stare at her all day? He shook his head, waking him from his reverie. He couldn't help but wonder, so, why, exactly do you disguise yourself as a male again? She said, Thanks, you're not too bad looking yourself. Come see me again in a few more years. He blushed a little as she said, Because people stare and ask me out, but don't fear me. However, if I'm a male, it's apparently a symbol of power to you stupid humans. Naruto noticed something he'd missed before. She had a face. She was wearing a dark red kimono that didn't look like it was for formal wear. No, this had to be just to make him stare. Her eyes were red that had a subtle beauty to them, and her tail swayed in a way that nearly put him in a trance. Tearing his gaze from her tail, he said, So, do you have a name that's not Kyuubi? He felt his face heat up as she said, Yeah. Yuzura Shiri, Fuzzbutt. Her laugh was almost otherworldly. It wasn't human, it wasn't angelic, it was just different. My real name is Hitomi, pupil, given to girls with especially beautiful eyes, and that's just something that never gets old. That's a pretty name. She smiled. Her expression was supposed to be joyful, but it seemed like she was up to something. Her big canines didn't help either. He looked down at those and noticed that she had claws, which were both elegant and lethal at the same time. He wasn't sure how this was possible. Still grinning, she said, So Kit. To what do I owe this pleasant surprise visit? I kind of discovered some sake on the table beside my bed and drunk yourself into oblivion? She finished for him. There might be hope for you yet. I also saw your fight with Sasuke. It was embarrassing, she said, changing to a commanding voice, her smile turning into a dismaying frown like a lead weight in water. She approached him and stabbed him in the chest, saying, You're weak. The fourth stab sent him reeling back to his butt, and the memories of that fight came flooding back to him. Yeah, but what did he do? Who was left standing? Who walked away? Not me. She was right, and it hit home, and Naruto swore his heart was being torn apart. She squatted down to eye level with him and said, "Don't you start falling to pieces on me, Kit. I'm gonna help you fix that. So you just pull yourself back together before I beat the crap out of you." Naruto did nothing, but she got up and reared back a foot before swinging it forward, sending him flying. He bounced and skidded, losing control of his body as it soared through the air, and he finally stopped after skidding the last 10 feet on his back. He knew he was bleeding, and he watched her approach him. "I'll kick you again. Get up," she said icily, and he did nothing. "I can't," she said, looking at him with a confused expression on her face. "One of your tails is holding me down." She picked up the tail and attempted to move it, but Naruto grabbed it first. She yawned and stretched in a cat-like manner, then looked up at her bed, her head on his chest still, and she blushed deeply, as he already blushed, before he finally quit, wanting to see what happened. "Looks soft." He began petting it, then heard a sound like a motor, and realized it was coming from Hitomi. He smiled as she sat on him and continued purring, and finally she lay down, using Naruto as her personal pillow, and fell asleep. Her purring doubled, and he let go of her tail and began scratching her at the base of her ears, before he stopped, wanting to see what happened. She yelled, "Damn it, Kit, I'm going to kill you, don't you ever touch my tails again, you hear me?" There was no question in her voice. Before recognizing his own folly, Naruto asked, "How long have I been in here anyway?" There was obviously no clock in this room. He eyed her curiously and said, "Probably about 15.20 minutes in here. Outside, it's probably been about the same amount of time." She saw the look she was getting and went on, "I can control how fast time goes in here as opposed to how fast it goes outside. So it can be 20 minutes in here, and 20 seconds out there, or 20 seconds out there, and 20 days in here." His mouth formed a, "Oh. Also, you should not wake up from that sake for at least another hour. But we've got to talk. So I'm going to be a pain and fix the time. It's going to be an hour in here. But a day out there." She gave him her evil foxy grin. When he had recovered from his shock, he asked, "So, what are we going to talk about?" Her smile only got bigger. He shrugged and followed her as she went down corridor after corridor, twisting them further and further into a twisted maze until she finally stopped at a door. "Let's start with what bugs me the most. Those clothes." She pointed at him and said, "They should be outlawed. As your new sensei, I want you to burn them. All of them." Her eye twitched slightly at the sight of his clothes. "Actually, we're going to burn them." She chuckled and said, "I should only have 5 minutes left in here. More like 50. Naruto looked at her, his mouth drooping a little, and she laughed even harder. "I made it take longer for you to wake up just to annoy you." He frowned and asked, "And how much longer, exactly?" "Not too much. Just about 3 hours. He moaned. She smiled, opened the door, grabbed the front of his shirt, and threw him in. She walked in behind him and slammed the door shut. She turned around and tackled him, removing his shirt and pants. "There, that wasn't so bad, was it?" He was flushed, sensing my face burning. "It's cold in here, and I'm only wearing my underwear." Her mutter, "I wish you wore briefs," was barely audible to him. He stared at her and said, "Why?" She merely shook her head and flushed a little, then went to her closet and threw a mask, a shirt, pants, and titanium-backed gloves at him. Naruto gazed at her and said, "Put those on. What prevents me from wearing my old clothes?" "Because I said so. Now put them on," she screamed, and there was a roaring sound as she did so. "Now, when you wake up, you'll be wearing these. Look around the room when you wake up and you should find another gown. You're going to have to wear that as long as you're in the hospital." She walked to the other side of the room and began pulling drawers open, seemingly in search of something, and she threw a scroll at him. Naruto was pulling a shirt over his head at the moment, and he was struck in the nose with it. She was standing on one side of the room 1 second, and then she was in front of him before Naruto could even comprehend that she was no longer there. She pushed him onto his back and held him down, and he yelled, "Ow!" as his nose began to bleed. Her blood-red eyes began to glow as she hurried over to him. "Human blood. How I've wanted to taste it for so long." Naruto saw her tails stiffen and her voice take on a more demonic tone. She licked the blood from his face slowly, her claws digging into his chest as she drank his blood. He was too terrified to move at the time, so he prayed for the nosebleed to stop quickly. The more she drank, the more demonic she appeared, and at last he felt more of her tongue on his upper lip than he had previously, which must indicate that the nosebleed had stopped. He watched as her demonic features faded and she stopped, staring at him. Oops. 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 He'd better not tell her that he was bleeding on his chest or... Naruto felt my face heat up again. Sorry about that, whenever I see human blood. As you just saw, I kinda sorta go into a demonic mode, she said, jumping up and turning back to her dresser, apparently looking for something again, but she forgot about her mirror, and Naruto saw her blushing deeply. She turned around and approached him, but not before he had finally pulled on his pants and was tying on the mask. Hey there, Kit, she said in a charming, mesmerizing voice as she threw her arms around his waist, causing Naruto to blush. She then slowly approached his face before pulling away, holding a kunai in her hand. Thanks Kit, she said, smiling. He felt foolish because he knew that she couldn't have kissed him anyway because he was wearing his mask. He gasped when she took the kunai and tore it down both of her forearms, quickly soaking each hand in blood until the wound and blood on her arms vanished, but the blood on her hands remained. Remove your shirt. What? She screamed, the roar returning in her voice, and he hurriedly pulled the shirt over his head, saying, now pull down the mask. After he had done so, she slammed her hands into his chest on both abs, again on the seal on his stomach, and drew a kanji symbol on both of his cheeks. When she was finished, he looked down and saw that his stomach and chest had bloody handprints, and he assumed that the kanji on his cheeks was blood as well. Suddenly, it began to sizzle as steam rose from the blood. Ignoring his groans of pain from the burning blood on him, she said, something's still missing. Aha, I know what it is, she said, swiftly biting into his neck, drawing blood easily, and holding her canines there for a brief moment before releasing him. She waved him away, saying, all right, I'm done with you. If you want, you can put your shirt and mask back on. Naruto screamed, what did you do to me? After the blood stopped sizzling and vanished. The bite on the neck. She snickered evilly. Well, that's a surprise. I won't tell you. You're gonna have to find out all by your lonesome. Hitomi pointed an evil grin at him. The blood was so that now whenever you aren't here, I can still talk to you in your mind. That way I can train you. So why did you attack Konoha? He asked abruptly, and she sighed as her smile vanished. With a sad expression, she said, if I tell you, you're not going to like it. Or me. Then she abruptly shook her head and said, no, I won't tell you. Maybe when you're older. But not now. You're better off not knowing for sure. Anyway, it's time for you to wake up. Sakura's come to visit you. His expression changed from neutral to sad. I can't face her, so please just let me stay in here. Once more, it wasn't a question. Kid, I ain't having a wimpy vessel. Now, you're going to buck up, go out there, face her, and move on. She glanced at him after he said, wait. I have a question. What am I? He asked, seemingly steeling himself before completing the question, still failing to look her in the eye. What do you mean? She smiled as he asked, what am I? Am I a human, a demon, or both? You're a full-blooded demon, so be proud, he said, looking at her in confusion. But my parents were, she interrupted. You have a bloodline, but not like the Haruno, Hyuga, or Uchiha bloodlines. A few thousand generations ago, a lesser demon was sealed within your clan. This demon allowed your clan to have unrivaled stamina, and the ability to quickly learn any jutsu. The only drawback was, if it was too easy, you can't do it, she said, smiling at his bewildered expression. She snickered as he asked, smiling, the Harunos? What's their bloodline? The pink hair? She smiled and said, hey, their hair is a part of the bloodline. Fortunately for the males, it only goes through the female side of the bloodline. But they also have an inner persona that can take over their body, take information from their conscious and subconscious mind and keep it. So if they're being tortured, they won't give information, because they can't. Naruto gaped. She looked him in the eyes and said, don't look so surprised. I know you know at least a small part of that. I also know that you aren't as stupid as you act, or look. He glared at her and said, damn. You cheated. She simply stuck her tongue out, and Naruto swiftly reached out and took it. She glared at him and said, you won't too keep your fingers? You want to keep your fingers? He simply stuck his tongue out but quickly pulled it back in before she could get a hold of it. What's wrong? Did Fox get your tongue? Naruto gave an evil snicker. She eagerly flexed her fingers and said, okay, let me pud it this way. Do you want to keep being a boy? Do you want to keep being a boy? He quickly let go. As soon as he wiped Fox's spit on her, she raised her knee and nailed him. She snapped her fingers and he was suddenly staring up at a ceiling. Try that again, and there won't be a place to hit next time, she said sternly. Now, go see Sakura, she's about to walk out. Sakura turned back to face Naruto, clipboard in hand, who moaned, still aching from the kick to his butt. She turned to face him and said, Naruto, He nodded slightly and stared back at her before she rushed over and punched him in the stomach, screaming, "Where's Sasuke?" before punching him once more. This time, she punched him in the face as he said sadly, "With Orochimaru by now. Why does he not join US? Because I couldn't get him. He almost killed me," he said without showing any emotion. She yelled, "Liar. You let him go, didn't you? You let him keep go because you were jealous. Then you beat yourself up just to make it look like you fought, but really, you just let him go so you wouldn't have any competition. You just wanted to make yourself look good, and now you don't have anyone to show how weak you are like he did." He was growling, and the noise was rapidly increasing in volume. "The villagers are right. You are a demon," she said, glaring at him, her eyes full of hate. The last straw was when she attempted to axe kick him in the stomach, but he caught it. She twitched a little as he said, "Let me tell you something, Pinky. But first, I want to know. Where did you hear that? Was it you who carved demon into that table? Or do you know why they call me demon?" he asked, clenching his hand over her foot. She sneered at him and said, "Who didn't hear it? I actually heard it when they rioted and tried to kill you. I think I was 8 at the time. No, I didn't carve demon into the table. Dr. Aizen did that, and I don't know why they call you a demon. Sorry, couldn't help the bleach guy. I hate him. By the way, don't own bleach either." He grabbed her foot even more tightly. He ended there, but he held onto her foot. "Let me tell you a story. The Kyuubi wasn't killed by the Yondaime. She couldn't be killed. Her name wasn't even Kyuubi, it was Hitomi. He had to seal it in a baby whose chakra coils weren't fully developed because Hitomi couldn't be killed." She gasped when she realized how he knew. "How do you know it's a she? And her names are Hitomi." "You." He simply nodded. You are a demon." That was all he could take from her. He pressed the nurse button on his bed, and a nurse, actually, Tsunade, came right away. She screamed, "What's going on in here?" Sakura screamed back, "Get that demon out of here." Tsunade's eyes widened. "You told her?" she asked, glancing at Naruto, who simply nodded and got to his feet, still wearing the black clothing Hitomi had given him because he had forgotten to get a new gown and had no other option at the time. He then pulled up his mask and left. She grabbed Naruto's shoulder and said, "Wait, Naruto." He stopped, saying, "I'll let you go home, but this doesn't leave this room. None of this happened. I'll kill you." "Shut up." He effectively knocked her unconscious by punching her in the stomach. Tsunade screamed, "Naruto." He turned to face her and asked, "What the hell is wrong with you?" She simply pointed down the hall toward the break room, and a few minutes later, she saw Dr. Aizen fly down the hallway. She took it one step too far. "Now, I need to see a Dr. Aizen," he said, smiling. Naruto was in a foul mood, so he went to the Hokage tower after walking home, punching anyone who said, "Demon." He could deal with the villagers, of course, but not when a friend betrays him in such a manner. "Hey Naruto, can you guess what I'll do?" "What?" "I will read the author's note at the bottom, as it is significant and involves the readers." Naruto and Hitomi strike a gay pose before carrying on with the narrative. She sighed and briefly held his head in her hand before turning back to face him. "Ba-chan," he exclaimed, slamming his hands on her desk. "I want out of this village. Send me on a training mission or something. Anything, just get me out." With a note of sorrow in her voice, she said, "I'm sorry, Naruto, but I can't. The council says that you can't even be taken off active duty for a second. They've locked your status because you couldn't bring back Sasuke. You can't even quit. They said if you do, it'll be considered treason, and they'll execute you." That is not possible. When she asked, "Who's gonna stop them?" he realized she was correct. They were the highest-ranking officials in the Konoha government. He let out a defeated sigh. Before she could say another word, he opened her window and leapt. Using his chakra, he landed lightly and continued. "Out of the kindness of their hearts," she sneered, "they've allowed you the day off. Have fun." He recognized the voice and recalled that Hitomi had made it possible for them to communicate mentally. "Your father wouldn't have allowed this." "Anyway, who was my father?" she said, "The Yondaime. He could have gotten them to change their minds. Sadly, nobody likes Tsunade like they did with the Yondaime." Her voice carried a hint of sadness this time, and Naruto was taken aback. The Yondaime was his father. He looked up at the Hokage monument and saw his father staring down at him, but he was unable to look him in the eye. Although it was carved, it was his father, so he decided to train in the forest rather than return home. So he changed his route once more and went in the direction of the nearest training ground. When Hinata saw a black-clad figure on the street, she followed him for a while before realizing it was Naruto. Since she had nothing to fear, she followed him closer than before because she knew he was going to a training ground. When he arrived, he stopped and sat down, then abruptly changed into a knee. Hi, single. Tailed fox, which began to skip around before turning red and turning to face Naruto. It then yipped, and Naruto drew a kunai. The blood glowed blue, then turned black and faded, and he wrote the kanji for 100 over all the places he wrote his blood on. Then he did another tiger seal and moaned. Hinata gasped, thinking he was going to kill it, but instead he cut his palm and dabbed a finger in the blood before drawing on his arms and ankles with it. She blushed as he pulled off his shirt and drew symbols, kanji, and designs across himself, before creating seals. Tiger, ram, rat, monkey, ox, snake, hare, dragon, and tiger. The fox yipped again, and she saw him lay there, trying to get up, but the weight was too much, so he couldn't even get his arms in a position to push himself up. Hinata realized that he had made weight seals across his body, which prevented him from needing to wear weights, and they were each 100 pounds. He tried to stand, but he fell out on his face, and the ground where he landed had a dent in it because of this. When she returned the following day, she discovered the fox and Naruto both asleep and unmoving. This pattern persisted until the third day, when she noticed him slowly pushing himself up with his arms raised, and she watched until he was standing up. She grinned and left, heading to find her teammates once more. After reaching the training ground, Naruto leaned his back against a tree and made a cage bushin, saying to Hitomi, "I have an idea." He then moved the demon fox to his bushin, which was obviously only a small portion of her original power, but it was still sufficient. She jumped and ran around, performed a few flips, and sat down, looking at him before yipping a thank you, but oddly, he understood her. She gave him a wink, which caused Naruto to blush a little. "Thanks, Kit. If I can transform into my human form, or when you come to see me again, I think I'll have to express my thanks in a better way." Without pausing to consider whether she could hear him, he thought, "So what do you want me to do, sensei?" "I'll give you the knowledge you need to do this. You're going to make weights." Suddenly, he understood what she was talking about and how to do it. He took out a kunai, cut his palms, and began creating the necessary seals to make the weights. After he was done, he went through some seals and marked the weight on each that she instructed him to put. He sealed it with another hand seal, at which point he felt his body sink slightly into the dirt, and Naruto fell flat on his face when he attempted to stand up. Hitomi only said, "Once you can get up, we'll move on." He struggled until he heard footsteps at around 10 on the second day, but was too buried in the ground to look up. By 5, he had gotten his hands in the push-up position, and on the third day, he was finally standing up. He only said, "Hitomi, I'm up," with a fox-like smile. Hitomi gazed at him through drowsy eyes, having just been awakened by the sound of his voice. She said simply, "I swear, you're going to make me proud, Kit." He blushed and looked up to see Hinata leave. As he began to approach her, she said, "Don't, Kit. She'll want to talk, and you don't have time." "You're in training," she said plainly. He looked at her and asked, "Why do you call me Kit?" "It's a term of affection. Of course, if you want I could call you Naruto. Koibito, lover. Would you prefer Kit?" "Goshuji, husband," she asked with an evil smile, and Naruto blushed a little. She then began to laugh. "Kit'll work," he said, a little stuttering. He nodded and attempted to take a step, forgetting his weights, but almost fell on his face again. "Good, now that we've got that sorted out, go home." "Damn it," he cried out. She smiled and said, "Once you get to Tsunade's office, we'll move on." Hitomi stood up and followed him, and after 2 hours or so, he eventually made it to her office, where he was worn out but unable to sit down. He opened the door, limped in, and shut it. Tsunade looked up to see Naruto and a fox, who yipped at him before he performed a few hand signals, and the entire room glowed neon green before going out. She roared and punched him, expecting him to fly, but instead she was slid backwards a few feet, while Naruto slid back about 6 inches. "Konnichiwa, Ba-chan," he said, smiling. Tsunade gave Naruto a deer.in. The headlights stare. "Huh?" she asked. He said, jerking his thumb in the direction of the fox, "says that I need all this extra weight and made me haul myself from training ground 8 to here. It's a half mile." He yelled the last sentence at the fox, who was suddenly eye level with Naruto. "I weigh around 620 pounds right now, Ba-chan. I don't think that's gonna work," he said, laughing a little. With a smile, Hitomi bowed to Tsunade and said, "Konnichiwa, Ba-chan, as Kit calls you. You're going to thank me by next week." "Kit? Isn't that a fox term?" Hitomi smiled, exposing her big canines and slightly flexing her claws to draw Tsunade's attention to them. They said. She pointed a finger at Tsunade, who was gaping at her, and then turned to hit Naruto in the face, sending him on his butt and cracking her floor. One floorboard even shot up and got stuck in the concrete ceiling above their heads. Hitomi. Of course, according to all your damn books I'm Kyuubi. You've really gotta change those. As he struggled to stand up, he screamed, Baa. Chan, I just got up. It took me 3 days to stand up. Hitomi finally showed sympathy and lifted him up by the shirt collar as if he were weightless, and he sighed, that's not right. She jerked her thumb at Naruto and said, but yes, I am the Kyuubi, also known as Hitomi, sensei of Kid here. I demand that he be released on a dual objective mission. One objective is to train and get stronger. The other is to use that training to capture and return Sasuke. Oh, and Naruto, for now, you can release those seals. He screamed in arigato and formed a ram seal. Whoa, that's strange. I feel like I weigh nothing. Tsunade caught him by the front of his shirt and said, smiling, you might as well be. Your body is now used to about, say, 150 pounds of extra weight. She screamed in his face, you let her out? Were you dropped on your head as a child? What gave you that bright idea to break the seal placed and let her out? Naruto shoved her away. Tsunade wasn't persuaded, but she chose to put up with her. Yes, it wasn't my idea, yes. However, if you look at her tail, you'll notice she only has one. The other 8 are stored away in what's left of the seal. So, even if she did go on a rampage, it would be easy to stop her. Second, she's not going to do anything. Naruto's mouth fell open as the Kyuubi sighed, okay, but I still can't let Naruto leave the village. He can't even do a high-ranking D mission right now. They all have to be of the lowest pay. After turning on Naruto's weights, she grabbed him and dragged him out of the room, saying only, fine. See ya. By the time they left, her room was glowing red, and Tsunade realized that they had soundproofed it. So, what are we going to do now? Naruto asked, and Hitomi smiled. He heard a villager murmur, we're going to go pack your bags and get a good night's rest. She yipped, now in her fox form. Naruto screamed and slammed into the man, saying, a demon fox and another fox. They deserve each other in the deepest, hottest part of hell. The 600-pound teenager on the man's chest caused his ribs to break, causing him to scream. Naruto slowly got back up and made it to his apartment, where Hitomi led him to his room. He had a voice in the back of his mind telling him that it should be the other way around, but when he entered, he discovered that all of his clothes were burned, including his jumpsuits, and that the clothes he was wearing were on his bed, but now had the red Uzumaki spiral on the back. Naruto blinked and said, all right, pack those and I'll get the shit out of your drawers. My boxers are in there. How about we do it the other way around? Naruto blushed as he realized the double meaning of, so? I've watched you grow up through your own eyes. There's nothing in there I haven't seen before. She simply laughed, and then he looked at his clock and said, okay, it's 3 o'clock now. We don't have to leave for another 9 hours. Turn off your weights, we've got work to do. He nodded, turned them off, and then hurried into the kitchen to get food for his 2-day empty stomach. He learned to transform into his full demon form during those 9 hours, one of which was spent eating. She told him it was very difficult, but when he was done, she discovered that it was actually the easiest thing for a demon to do. She knew that if she told him that, he wouldn't try as hard, which would make it harder for him. The 2 red foxes, one blood red and the other orange-red hybrid, were running through the streets at a breakneck pace toward the west side gate at the moment. The lighter fox stopped abruptly and yipped, while the darker fox barked back with a more commanding back. The lighter fox simply stuck its tongue out and leapt up some stairs that led up the side of an apartment complex, while the darker fox growled and followed its partner. The light fox suddenly transformed into a teenage boy, while the darker one transformed into a stunning young woman. Naruto and Hitomi were standing at Iruka's doorstep when Naruto knocked, and they waited for a few minutes before he opened the door. Naruto was all he managed to escape before being beaten inside his home, and Hitomi entered behind him, hastily closing the door and soundproofing the space. Iruka leapt to his feet and suddenly drew a kunai. Who are you? He asked, assuming a fighting stance, while Naruto merely smiled. It's me, Iruka, sensei, he said as he approached him. Prove it, he exclaimed, refusing to change his position. Iruka scowled and threw his kunai onto his coffee table. I got bored on the first day I was at the academy and turned your clothes hot pink, he said, laughing a little. So, who is she and what was that all about? I'm Hitomi. Or better known as the Kyuubi, she said dejectedly, recalling that his parents had given their lives for a friend. She rushed up to embrace him, whispering just 2 words in his ear. I'm sorry. Naruto's expression was one of bewilderment, while Iruka's was one of terror. Iruka questioned, why? Why did you kill them? In reference to his parents. They split apart, and Iruka glanced at the 2 of them. I didn't mean to. I knew they had a kid, so I tried to avoid them. But to save a comrade, they jumped in the way of my fire and took the hit instead of the one I aimed it for, she said sadly. You never responded to my question. What's the deal? Iruka nodded quietly. We soundproofed the room so no one will hear what I'm about to say, and we sealed your door so nobody breaks in. The room glowed red, and the door glowed purple. Me and her leaving. We should be back in a few years. She's going to train me until I have the power to wield more than the 2 tails I have now. She's also going to make me stronger all around. After that's done, I'm going to get Sasuke and come back. If I kill Orochimaru, that's just a bonus. I need you to tell Tsunade what I just told you. She already knows about Hitomi. Looking at his sensei's bewildered expression, he continued, it's not safe to talk anymore. The chakra supply I gave her ran out. Now I've gotta leave. Bye sensei, he said, before Iruka gave him a hug. Iruka inquired, when did you find a brain? Iruka watched in disbelief as the door closed. Then he sat on his couch and replayed what had happened. Naruto said simply, I always had one. A dumb demon has a chance in life, because nobody expects anything amazing from an idiot. But a smart demon doesn't have a chance. Iruka got up and ran for the Hokage's office, having to tell her before someone sent out hunter ninjas. So the kid who was always Adobe is going to leave town, train until he's probably a 9-tailed demon, defeat Sasuke, probably kill Orochimaru, and return. Where he's going to probably die. Naruto made another bushin and transformed it into Hitomi after he had briefly left the complex. With wide eyes, she said, Good Lord Kit, how much chakra did you give that last bushin? He smiled and remarked, the rest went into that bushin. I only had enough to seal the Hokage's office and enough to keep me from chakra exhaustion. Then Naruto pinched her lips together. You're dumb. I was wondering how that thing was holding out so long, she screamed. Remember to be quiet, she said, and they both transformed into single-tailed demons before sprinting to the western gate. They had already wasted 30 minutes and needed to leave. A call for all shinobi to report to the Hokage Tower was heard throughout Konoha the following day, and all of them, along with a few nearby civilians, gathered around the dome-shaped Hokage Tower. I'm sorry to report. Tsunade sniffed and wiped her eyes. I'm sorry to report that last night, at 2400 hours, Uzumaki Naruto ran from this village, without mine or the council's permission. His classmates and the Junin who knew him gasped. If he is found, he must be bound and be in one piece and alive. He is to be brought back to be interrogated, and then he will be. She choked, then tried again. He will be questioned and put to death, Sakura exclaimed. No, that isn't possible. Is Naruto not present? It couldn't be true that no one would see him flying over the rooftops or doing laps around Konoha anymore. It was not intended for Naruto to go. He was meant to remain there and be upset with her for shouting at him. He wasn't meant to go, though. They had been out of Konoha for just over a day. Despite having long depleted his chakra, Naruto managed to continue running across the tree branches. How much farther? Naruto inquired. A bit more, was Hitomi's response. First, we must leave Fire Nation. They won't accept that we left in a single night and will assume that we're still in the Konoha area. As she waited for Naruto to understand, she added, we also need a change of course. She then turned and traveled several hundred yards to the southwest before coming to a halt and descending to the ground, where she was panting. That was a long run, Naruto said, panting at her. She simply smiled and extended her hand. Kunai. He gave her one while scowling. Naruto was always afraid of her kunai because he had no idea what she would do. She pulled it across her hand and allowed it to drip into her palm, creating a puddle. When she had a good-sized amount in her hands, she cupped her hands and allowed the puddle to grow. Abruptly, she tossed it outside into a grassy, open space. In their training, Naruto had started referring to her as Hitomi-chan. What did that accomplish? He inquired, but the ground rumbled in response as a slab of earth rose, creating a cave's mouth. This is my family's training home, Kit, she said with a smile. Naruto cocked his head to one side in an attempt to decipher it. My family's blood is required for it to open, but since I have no family, my own blood must do all the opening. So, until I find Sasuke, we're going to live in a cave? She began to enter, and Naruto, not wanting to be left behind, hurried after her. Until we find Sasuke, and yes. As soon as he entered, the cave's mouth sank back in, and lights inside the cave began to illuminate. As he followed her, the first thing he saw was how big it was. Despite the lights, he was unable to see the top of the cave. As he continued, he noticed a section that appeared to be a huge battlefield. That's our training field, Hitomi must have said after noticing the expression on his face. Since you will spend the majority of your time in that room, you will eventually treat it as though it were your own bedroom. He observed the construction of the cave as they continued walking. It appeared to be compacted dirt rather than something that had been dug out. It seemed as if a tremendous force had simply separated the dirt with sufficient force to cause it to turn to stone, which is exactly what had occurred. They continued walking and eventually came to what appeared to be a dead end, but there were rooms on the left and right as well as one in front of them. They also passed a kitchen, a bathroom, and a weight room. For our half-demon forms, she informed him as they passed. She indicated the rooms on the right. That belongs to you. As she entered her own room, she said, I'm just across the hall. You have 2 days. Take a look around and get some rest. Before she vanished in a cloud of smoke, she only said, meanwhile, I'm out of chakra. The final words he heard before collapsing in the middle of the floor from chakra exhaustion were, well, I got us here anyway. This time he opened his eyes and found himself in a room. He looked around and saw his location. The room of Hitomi. In fact, he was pretty at ease. He was unaware of the floor's springiness, warmth, and the fact that it was resting on his chest the last time. He looked down and saw Hitomi sleeping soundly, her head resting comfortably on his chest. Naruto sighed and flushed deeply. Well, at this point, he was powerless. It's likely that she was also worn out from that run. Later, when he woke up again, they were in a different position. This time he noticed she was awake, even though her back was to him. She noticed a slight increase in his breathing and smiled, realizing he had awakened. She turned to face him and smiled broadly at his now red face, saying, you know, you've got to visit me more often. You know that you blush a lot around me, don't you? His face turned even more red as she spoke, and she had to suppress her laughter, something she hadn't believed was possible. She placed her hand on Kit's chest and gasped, I wonder why. Surely it isn't that Kit isn't used to any female attention. Hitomi was on the verge of laughing when she said, no. Not someone as cute as you, Kit. The expression on his face finally made it happen when she tugged and pinched his cheek as she was saying her final sentence. She started giggling. Naruto merely scowled. He was too busy trying to make the blush go away to say anything more than, not funny. His face took on a serious expression, and his blush abruptly disappeared. When our training is over, how strong will I be? What? He inquired. Hitomi let out a sigh. To be honest, I'm not sure. I can assure you that you will become stronger. Right now, we ought to at least double your chakra supply. By the time we're finished, 500 pound weights will be nothing. What you need to become Hokage will be taught to you. She gave his name a slight growl. I'll have to teach you about sealing so Orochimaru can't 5. Prom seal us again. That had been extremely painful. She spoke slowly so as not to overstate how strong he ought to be. And I'll have a surprise for you when you wake up that we can't do in here. What is it? Almost bouncing on his side, he asked. Before he could shake the bed down, Hitomi intervened. It wouldn't be shocking if I told you, would it? Her words were followed by a cheeky grin that revealed her true identity as the Kyuubi. Naruto moaned and reached for his back pocket, but Hitomi grabbed his wrist. But before I train you, I want you to pay me. Her smile widened as she slowly lowered his mask, saying, not exactly what I was talking about. Naruto slowly nodded, his face blushing slightly at her behavior. I don't want you to wear this unless we leave the cave. Then, as she slowly shifted her head in his direction, it turned blood red. She approached slowly before finally finding her mark and planting a full-on kiss on Naruto's lips. She gave him time to get used to the kiss before gradually intensifying it. In a hurry, he kissed her in return. He gasped as she nibbled on his lower lip, but she paused, breathing heavily. Well, fuck. She pointed to his hand, which was fading in and out of existence, and said, looks like you're waking up. When he eventually passed away and opened his eyes to reveal a black ceiling that he was still unable to see, she said, I'll take that as pay. He let out a sigh. What would have happened if he hadn't woken up? If only he hadn't woken up. The thought made him flush once more. I do that far too often. Every time I say something, if I'm not careful, I'll start stuttering and rubbing my fingers together. Or perhaps cultivate a Byakugan. He laughed at his own joke, then rose and made his way to the kitchen through the cave. Hey, Kit. Let me go, in his mind, she said. He merely smiled. Why should I? Because that's what I said. If you ever want to pay rent again, let me go now, in his mind, she screamed. He swiftly formed a cage bushin and a cross with his fingers. Then he sent Hitomi into his demon chakra. Much better. Please help me if you do that once more. You're paying rent with hard currency, don't you hear me? She shouted. He gave a quick nod. Let's go prepare some food now. I am famished. Would that even be feasible? He looked at her and asked. She smiled sheepishly and said, you're a bushin, with no physical body at the moment because it's sealed inside my stomach, and I'm assuming you don't have to eat. Well, not exactly, but the food sounds good, she said, shoving him toward the kitchen in the back. Plus, we can begin the torture sooner if we eat sooner, she coughed. When they eventually arrived in the kitchen, she shoved him into a chair and said, I mean, training, we can start the training. Hitomi turned around and began taking items out of cabinets, boiling water, and taking out bowls. She also threw Naruto some chopsticks that landed where his hand had been a second before and inserted them into the table. Since you paid rent so well, I thought I'd make breakfast. The chopsticks were made of wood, which is amazing. She said, sorry, Kit, and went on. She finally placed a bowl of miso ramen in front of him after 10 more minutes or so. Itadakimasu. Before they began to eat, they both said. Naruto thought he was in heaven after just one mouthful of noodles. This was incredible, but he had no idea what it was. Holy shit, he addressed her. She grinned. She smiled and said, I'm going to take that as a compliment. He gave a forceful nod. What made it so good? Water for the toilet. She uttered those words and began to laugh at the expression on his face. She grabbed it when he stuck his tongue out. What do we have here, then? Perhaps a chance to even things out. She smiled malevolently. Oh, I apologize. Did you miss that? In any case, what's wrong? Kitsune, are you unable to speak? She laughed at her own small joke. I don't have Roman, he essentially pleaded. With a sigh, she released it. You're not entertaining. He smiled and put down his chopsticks, saying, you'll get over it. He didn't want to spend time eating with chopsticks, so he turned up the entire bowl. He went to get him another bowl and sat it down. After Hitomi bowled twice and Naruto bowled 10, they eventually started training. Hitomi turned to him as she walked down toward the training room. Do you recall the last time you experienced a nosebleed? Her face blushing slightly from the memory of what she had done, she asked. Naruto was surprisingly not flushed. He merely gave a nod. I experience that when I see human blood. I resemble a vampire in many ways. But instead of sucking your blood, I'll kill you and eat you. Therefore, don't let me see you bleeding while we're training. She bit her bottom lip in concern and stated, I'm going to try to work with as little sharp objects as possible, but we're going to have to work with swords eventually. She turned to Naruto as they entered the training room. I'll tell you now, Kit. I'm not going to show you any mercy, she said. Now, activate your weights, and scowled when he just gave her a foolish smile. They are all ready. Well, I'm confused, so I'll need you to explain this to me. If they are activated, how are you able to move so casually? She slapped her forehead and said, I didn't turn them off when we were running from Konoha. So, you were just going to tackle them or something if we were attacked by Hunter.nin. Hi. She dragged it down her face and gave herself another forehead slap. Alright. Anyway, let's see how well you work in them. She then punched him, knocking him off balance. He sprang to his feet and ran toward her. Since he would typically move more quickly, she saw that they were activated as he had stated. She deflected his punch and deflected the subsequent kick as well. Before charging again and swiping at one another, they leapt apart. He doubled over as the air left his body after Hitomi caught him in the stomach. She waited for him to catch his breath once more while maintaining a sparring stance. He straightened up, imitated her posture, and then kicked her head in the opposite direction. She was sent sprawling by the quick kick, but it had no effect until she kicked him back, slamming his back against the wall. Without any delay, she charged him once more, grabbed the front of his shirt, and threw him back across the room. She approached him while he lay on the ground. He grunted as he slowly got to his feet, saying, Come on and get up, I didn't hit you that hard. He was sent skidding across the room after failing to move quickly enough to sweep her feet out from under her. Rising, he charged her once more, using a Rasengan this time. She moved when he pushed it at her arm, and he spun around in midair to attempt to strike her back. She took it from him, charged it with some of her own chakra, and slammed it into his stomach after setting some chakra in her hand to spin in the same direction as the Rasengan. He would have a spiral-shaped bruise there tomorrow. He kicked up some debris as he slammed into the wall once more. He got up and thought of something, but he had to get it done before the dust settled. Hitomi raised an arm to block Naruto's punch as he charged at her. Shuriken suddenly appeared and almost killed Naruto, who was aware of their approach but managed to duck in time. He believed she would have escaped as well. However, when he saw her shuriken impaled body on the ground, he began to gasp. She was not breathing. Naruto hurried to her and began removing the shuriken from her body. Praying that she would breathe again, he closed her nose and began breathing for her. Then, as he had assumed, he discovered that the ceiling was indeed composed of rock. You bastard! I'll murder you! Why did you think throwing a shuriken at me was a good idea? You're doubling your weight for that? I got one of those things in my lung. I had died. Whether you were breathing for me or not, I would have died if I had been a human. You're lucky that my powers will continue to heal me after I pass away, or I would return to kill you. He then dropped from the ceiling, got to his feet, and approached her slowly. Hitomi. Sensei? He posed a questioning query. He disabled the weights with a ram seal. What? She yelled. Silent tears streamed down his face as he rushed over to embrace her. Hitomi tensed. He whispered, I thought I'd killed you, before burying his head in her shoulder and sobbing loudly. She gazed at him in disbelief. Despite knowing Naruto for his entire life, she had never witnessed him cry. After overcoming her shock, Hitomi relaxed and wrapped her arms around him. It's all right, Kit, she croaked softly. She moved them back to a wall after a few minutes and leaned her back against it to wait for his sobs to stop. Hitomi kept babbling consoling words until they stopped. He rolled over and sat up, resting beside her with his back against the wall. The day's training has been cancelled. We'll begin anew tomorrow. The only thing to do here is sleep, I realize. I cancelled it because of this. You require the respite. Come on now. She interrupted him, got to her feet, and dragged Naruto up by the hand. After guiding him down the hallway, Hitomi led him to her room. He saw that it was tastefully furnished and resembled the room she had imagined. She pushed him down on the bed after guiding him over to it. After taking off both her own and his shoes, she moved to the side and climbed in beside him. I assumed you wanted some company. She pushed her back against his chest and drew one of his arms over her shoulder, saying, If you wake up first, wake me up and we'll finish training. Hitomi realized he was already asleep when she turned to give him a cheek kiss. She turned over and went to sleep herself, grinning a little to herself. Naruto leapt from his bed. In his dream, a giant skeleton in a tuxedo was attempting to grab him in a theater. He had forgotten that he was a shinobi and had to beat the skeleton to the door, but the foolish skeleton kept beating him to it. It also had a frightening appearance. I don't own the Nightmare Before Christmas, by the way, but I did have a dream like that and almost fell off my top bunk. He noticed that Hitomi was not present when he looked around. He stood up and put on his sandals. Naruto got up and proceeded down the corridor. She wasn't in his bedroom because the door was open. Hitomi assured him that she would leave the library door open if she was inside, but it remained closed. He kept moving down the corridor. The bathroom door stood open, and no one was inside. That simply left the training room because the kitchen was empty. When Naruto entered, he discovered her training. He had never seen anything so exquisite. Around her, there were roughly 50 logs with their ends up. Before it could even move backwards from the force of each kick, it was splintered. However, that wasn't the most remarkable aspect. It was her movements. Hitomi appeared to be dancing. She cut through 3 logs with a helicopter. Like whirl of her feet, each move executed with grace. Beautifully executed, the punches were thrown out and swung over her head, preparing to hit another log. At last, she released all of her tenketsu at once with a massive chakra blast. The wood was ruined, and she stood there breathing heavily. He fed her a little more to keep her around because he could feel her chakra supply running low. He noticed a puzzled expression on her face as she gradually stopped breathing. He must have gone unnoticed by her. He therefore took the course of action that he knew would be appropriate in this circumstance. Hitomi squealed as Naruto tackled her. Indeed. The all-powerful Kyuubi no Kitsune, the mistress of pain, the demon of Konoha, and the monstrous destroyer squealed. She spun around and gave Naruto a face slap. Hentai. She let out a scream at him. He skidded to a stop where he began, spinning off like a boomerang and even returning after colliding with a sidewall. Naruto moaned as he lay there. OWWWWW. She held him down by placing her foot on his back. You are such a sicko. Do you know where your hands have gone? Naruto reflected, but was unable to recall. Nope. I don't think this is true. She muttered under her breath. My own student feels me up and doesn't even realize it. His face turned dark crimson as he gave it some more thought. She was correct. Damn. The last straw is that. I'm going to double your weight. Naruto felt his weights immediately double as she proceeded to break through some seals too quickly for him to see. Stand up, she said, glaring down at him. I apologize, Hito. Sensei, I promise I didn't intend to. With nothing to move but his neck, he screamed. The fact that he was immobile made Hitomi smile, but her new moniker made her flush. When did they start using pet names? You're right, Kit. Yes, you're sorry now. She snapped her fingers, and the area around it flickered a few times before turning into the damp, dark place inside his head. Well, you can be sorry in your head. Every hour in here is only a second outside thanks to the setup I made. Therefore, you have plenty of time to wake up. You move outside with every physical movement you make in here, she said with a smile. He began to struggle to get to his feet. Now that his head was pinned to its side, he became aware of something. The bars were nowhere to be found. Hi, Hito. Chan? He began by waiting for her to respond so he knew she had heard him. Huh? Whatever became of the bars? She looked over at him. You mean you can't recall? She said, giving him a startled look. After realizing he couldn't shake his head, he voiced the fact that he couldn't. You succeeded. The first seal was formally released when you entered the room and said, Kyuubi no Kitsune, your jailer, Naruto Uzumaki, release you from the first seal. You shall still be bound by the second seal unless a lethal attack comes to the second seal. He scowled. On that one, I must have missed the memo. He scowled and said, I don't remember a thing. Then he recalled his purpose and kept attempting to get up. Now that I consider it, she gasped, your eyes did have this blank look to them. Orochimaru. He must have devised a scheme to project a mental image of you here in order to release me when the five-pronged seal was released, Naruto sighed. I can now thank him for something. Therefore, you must be killed by a blow to my seal in order for me to release you. Well, shit, he groaned. At last, he let out a frustrated scream and blasted chakra through his arm's tenketsu. He was standing up straight when it shot him up like a rocket. Hitomi clapped and smiled. I wanted to know if you would ever consider that. Well done. The only issue is that after you leave, you'll be by yourself. I was just destroyed by that blast, she said. After a short while, Naruto woke up and discovered that he was in his room. Because of the faint snores emanating from his mind, he discovered that Hitomi was sleeping, as she had promised due to fatigue from her training this morning. He stood up, made a bushin, and commanded it to enter the bed. He smiled as he shoved Hitomi into the bushin after it had fallen asleep. She would believe she had escaped if everything went as planned. With an evil chuckle, he walked out of the room and closed the door, then turned to enter the library. He might be able to turn that into a reality rather than a joke if he continued studying sealing. Hitomi stretched and yawned. She searched for Naruto but couldn't find him. She opened her eyes and surveyed her surroundings with a moan. Hold on, this wasn't Naruto's head or her room. She scowled as she realized. Naruto is attempting to pull pranks once more. As she swung her legs out of bed, she thought, I'll kill him. She noticed the library door was open as she was leaving and entered. She went to the other side of the library after hearing a book slam. Hitomi saw that his nose began to bleed as she approached him. Why are you naked? Naruto let out a scream. She glanced down at him, then back up. Dipshit, because you did the bushin wrong. Give me your shirt now. What? Why? Gimme, go get yourself one. To keep you from freaking out, I only wear clothes. As he pulled his shirt over his head and threw it to her, more blood spurted from his nose. Now give me your shirt, unless you want me to wear it with you still in it. Enjoy yourself. Hitomi pulled the shirt over her head and said, oh, I will. Then she threw herself at him. She growled a little and said, your nose is bleeding, before licking it clean. He could see through her shirt, which made things worse, or better. In actuality, he could see through his shirt, which she was wearing, but the important thing is that a gorgeous, nude seductress had just tackled him and was licking the blood from his nose. He was screwed, boy. Naruto blushed a little at the word choice. A final burst of blood was released, and then it ceased. She scowled as she left him, then trodden on his abdomen. She smiled and said, sicko, stop staring. Then turned around and left Naruto without a shirt. Before opening the book, Naruto turned and walked back to the table where he was seated. Specifically, a book about breaking seals. A few minutes later, he closed the book tightly. Damn it, he sobbed. Nothing could be done. The seal of his father was too powerful. A fatal blow to the seal was the only way to break it. But that was impossible due to Hitomi's abilities. As that thought was coming to an end, Hitomi entered. After saying, put your little bookies up and come eat, she turned serious and said, we've got to talk. She then turned and left the room. Naruto ascended and trailed after her. The brief excursion continued all the way to the kitchen. After locating some rice balls, he took a seat at the table. She took a seat on the other side of him. Remember how I said you were a complete demon between your dad and me? He gave a nod. She started to say something, but she was interrupted. Her eyes widened slightly as she said, I assume it was a weaker Kyuubi than you, but had a high IQ. How did he discover that? As soon as she was released, she looked into his mind and discovered that it contained only her. He pointed to the ceiling and remarked, I can look at something. Like that light bulb. Because it takes chakra to make chakra, a small amount is set aside to make more, and the remainder is made to power the place. Yes, they have electricity. It's powered by a chakra supply that comes from a self-powered generator. This was an idea I came up with on the spot. Steal it and die. I am aware that it originates from a hidden room beneath the ground that is powered by a self-sufficient chakra generator that can produce 100,000 volts. He said, averting his gaze from the light bulb. I can analyze anything in an instant with just a glance. Then, as if attempting to capture a tiny insect, Naruto swung his hands through the air while glaring at something. What are you doing? Asked Hitomi, aiming to capture the tiny, vibrant dots. The 500-year-old Kyuubi merely moaned, you truly amaze me, but sit there and try to catch little dots made from your now broken eyes. They went. Little dots, please return. Hitomi began hammering her head against the table. She gave up after a moment and cleared her throat loudly, drawing his focus back to her. You're right about what you assumed. Indeed, it was a two-tailed Kyuubi, a wise demon. Thus, you were a Hanyu just for that. I enter the story at that point. You are a full-fledged Yukai, albeit an untrained one, to be sure, because of my blood. Hitomi sighed. The issue is that my blood is still dormant inside your body. I have to kill you to activate it, she said, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. Naruto was taken aback. And just how does that operate? Still stunned, he inquired. I bare my teeth. When I do, the interior immediately deteriorates, leaving only the enamel. Then I poured blood into it, and she halted. Hitomi had initially intended to kill this boy when she was first sealed, but she had eventually grown to love him. She was unable to murder this boy. She would have to, though. I use it to stab your heart. My blood seeps into your heart and you die instantly. He nodded slowly. It should make your heart beat again, sending my blood through your body and turning you into a complete demon. The only disadvantage is that no one has ever experienced it. Yukai has made numerous attempts at Hanyu, but none of them have ever succeeded. The theory is flawless. When they're supposed to resurrect is the issue. Naruto looked at her in disbelief, but he overcame it and braced himself. They don't. 3 simple words. I'll do it. It was one of the sentences on the list of sentences that have the power to transform people's lives. Hitomi gave a headshake. No, he refused to accept. Kid. Before you say that, I must tell you something. The Kyuubi sighed and then met his gaze. Because you didn't just say that. I love you, Naruto said, and his eyes grew wide. In his mind, he repeatedly played back her voice saying that, and he could only think of one answer. I also love you, he said slowly, but her eyes grew wide. Did he turn her down? Hitomi could feel her eyes filling with tears. I'm not sure. I'd like to do this. I'm not sure. After saying, I need to go think, he got up and gave her a kiss. It filled her with fear, love, and passion. Then he went down the corridor. She smiled in spite of everything. He wasn't turning her away. He was afraid. Then she came to another realization. She would have to murder him. This challenge would be faced by Naruto. He had a natural ability to overcome obstacles, and this was just another one he would have to do in life. Naruto took his time making his way from the kitchen to his room. The walk was lengthy. Gave him a lot of time to reflect. He was aware that he had claimed to love Hitomi, but was that really the case? Did it just happen on the spur of the moment? He smiled as her smile flashed through his mind. Indeed. They had known each other long enough to know that, despite their brief acquaintance. What about this recent development, though? Naruto was opposed to dying. He wished to keep his friends in Hitomi. Then he smiled, though. The benefits would include an almost limitless supply of chakra and instantaneous transformation into a 9-tail. It would be nice to have the insane strength. Naruto sat down on his bed and sighed, putting his head in his hands. How could he? 2 options were available. Life, postpone death, or death, perhaps return. He moaned as he spread out on his bed. What prevented him from simply tossing a coin? He stood up, smiled, and picked up a coin. It slid down his thumb a bit as he was flipping it, then took off and buried itself in a wall. With a groan, Naruto collapsed back onto his bed. Naruto became aware of something else, and his eyes grew wide. Why him? She could likely get any man she wanted, gay or straight. Why pick him? Just for holding her, the young demon boy received abuse and mockery. To keep them safe. Why should he survive and return to that as he had intended? The hard-ass trainer part of her mind wanted him to say yes, but Naruto could tell from the expression in Hitomi's eyes earlier that his mind wanted him to say no for private reasons. However, why would a powerful entity pick him? Naruto let out a moan. A royal pain in the ass was what this was turning out to be. With a sigh, he stood up and began to pace. Furthermore, how could he see her directly and know that his half-demon side, which wasn't dormant, was waning? and it wouldn't be returning. However, he would perish. However, he wouldn't if he lived, but if he did, perhaps he would be deserving. Then perhaps he wouldn't be so embarrassed to live. Demons are pitied and humans despise them. He had no intention of leading such a life. He couldn't possibly survive that, though. How could he survive it if half demons couldn't? A lowly human with a waning demon side. He was unable to inform Hitomi of that. If he did, Naruto could see the disappointment in her eyes. He couldn't allow himself to miss her in the event that Naruto died. He needed to get as far away from her as he could beforehand. The hole that was growing in his heart might not hurt as much then. When she drove a fang into it, he merely hoped she missed it. If not, he would need to be stabbed once more. The more he considered it, the more his heart began to break. What if his heart was gone? What would occur? All he wanted was to pass away. He most likely would. And he would have to keep an eye on her wherever he went, but he would never be allowed to approach her. Naruto rose and made his way back into the kitchen down the hall. Hitomi remained in her seat. Tears soaked the table she was leaning her head over. When she looked up at him, he was unable to meet her eyes and said, "Hitomi, I'm sorry. However, I am unable to do it. I feel compelled to tackle this. I want to disprove the things the villagers said about me." She choked back a sob and threw her arms around his neck, saying, "I want to do it." She turned and gave him a final look over her shoulder before finally making eye contact. "All right," she said, I'll go get everything ready." As he stood there solemnly, she watched one tear fall down his cheek. She was finished. The symbols were all drawn in blood, some of them covered in dirt from a tear that smudged them, and they were all piled aside after she had picked them up and tossed them over her shoulder. In an attempt to prepare for what was about to happen, Naruto lay shirtless with squiggles and shapes all over the area around his heart. Somewhere, deep down, he knew that this would hurt like nothing else. Even after Sasuke placed the Chidori in his chest, it did not. He made an effort to ignore that thought, though, and kept watching Hitomi. Abruptly, he said, "Hitomi." She turned to face him. "What are we?" She let out a sigh. "I'm not sure." "Then, would you be my girlfriend?" She gave him a startled look, but it quickly turned into a gentle but melancholy smile. "Yes," she muttered softly. She kept looking at her runes. He wouldn't be waking up if even one was incorrect. She got to her feet and turned to face him. "I'll be back." She turned and left the room, saying, "I need to go get a book from the library to make sure I got this right." When she returned 10 minutes or so later, she turned the pages of the book and examined every symbol, shape, squiggle, and kanji. Then, taking care to avoid stepping on any blood, they approached him and examined the ones on his chest. After that, she touched his heart with her finger and sent a tiny chakra spark into the skin above it. The blood rushing through his ears was now audible. "It won't work if I don't quicken your heartbeat because my blood won't contain enough proteins to replenish them." He nodded as he felt his own body begin to perspire and pant. "I have to convince your body that you're exercising so it'll produce more protein." "This will be painful, isn't it?" Silently, he inquired. He didn't initially believe she had heard him, but then he saw the tears in her eyes. "I won't tell you lies, Kit. The ones who did return died from the agony," she uttered softly. "I didn't want to frighten you about the pain, so I lied. About 25% of them have died as a result of that. The remaining 75% just didn't wake up," she said pitifully. He gave a nod. She began going through strange seals that appeared to be typical except for the odd finger that was either missing or present but shouldn't have been. All the blood went up onto the runes surrounding his heart when she slammed her hand onto it. The moment Kakashi sealed Sasuke's seal, for example. It was slightly painful, but not very much. Then, with a wince, she reached up and extracted her left canine tooth. As a new tooth erupts behind it, she briefly held it beneath her gum line before taking it out. "Kit, you are loved." Then she struck his heart with the tooth. He let out a scream. He had never experienced such pain. The tooth exploded in Naruto's heart, and that was that. Before all of his screams stopped, he stood next to his body and watched as he kept screaming. Hitomi whimpered a little and her eyes began to well up with tears. He began to glow red all of a sudden. Before being sucked headfirst into it, Naruto felt a pull in the direction of his body. There was no explanation for the pain. He regretted ever accepting this. His eyes rolled into the back of his head after he opened them just long enough to see Hitomi leap away from him. His bones were burning. They were rebuilding, melting. Millions of strings seemed to unravel from him. Then he felt them and more around him and inside his body before they connected in his mind. His skin melted and reformed, and his tailbone exploded in pain. The suffering. All he could focus on was that. The suffering. Knowledge filled his head, and it felt like it was about to blow up. When the two Tailed Kyuubi's blood was fully unlocked. Ideas, information, and theories that didn't make sense at first all of a sudden did. Filled his mind at an unfathomable pace, repeatedly expanding to accommodate it all and then contracting to fit inside his head. He could hear his yelling in the distance. By now, his heart was about to burst. It must have been prevented from doing so only by the seal on it. His muscles grew, and his skin reshaped and stretched. Then it abruptly stopped. His throat ached from screaming so loudly, and his entire body trembled. A tiny breath came into his lungs after he had stopped breathing for a moment. Only enough to keep him awake. He was experiencing sharp pains all over his body. "Kid, don't unwind just yet. It's not finished," she muttered. Naruto could hear her sobbing uncontrollably. As his eyes opened and then blew out of his sockets, the pain returned, accompanied by a tiny stream of blood and his optic nerve running behind them like a streamer. New ones grew in their place. In a bloody explosion, his arms and legs vanished, and new, clawed, and more powerful ones grew in their stead. A fresh pair of ears spouted from the top of his head, blasting out his old ones, eardrums and all, with more blood pouring behind them. His facial whiskers were singed from his skin and began to bleed. 6 real whiskers grew in their place. Then, with blood spattering his face, his nose became a bloody mass of nothingness, and a new one grew in its place. Although they had the same appearance, the new one was more powerful and could follow scents. The screams ceased, and his throat burned. His entire esophagus blew out of his neck as that one area of his neck swelled. He was now surrounded by a pool of blood that was dripping from his clothing. One that was no longer impacted by fire grew in its place. "Kid, it's over." Pulling his head into her lap, she said, "It's finally over." And, to clarify, the strings represent the reorganization of his chakra coils. Furthermore, the sensation of his mind expanding and contracting was real. As a thank you to all of the readers who have stuck with me this long, I decided to combine chapters 10 and 11 into one chapter instead of ending it here. I will now move on to chapter 11. My offering chapter 11. Naruto opened his eyes and turned to face her. Their cornea was slitted, but they were still blue. "Hitomi, it hurts," he muttered softly. He was still experiencing excruciating pain. His body continued to tremble a little, and Hitomi felt a few tears fall. She carried him down the hall after picking him up in bridal fashion. He said in a raspy voice, "Thanks, Hitomi. Stop talking. In any case, you won't be able to for a while," she uttered quietly. He gave a small nod. When they arrived at his room, she placed him on his bed and covered him with his comforter and sheet. "I must go burn the body parts and blood before they begin to rot. Then I'll be back." But he had finally succumbed to unconsciousness, so she said this to no one. Hitomi was sleeping beside Naruto when he regained consciousness. As he attempted to move, he gasped in agony. All right, so movement was strictly prohibited. But she was awakened by his scream of pain. Slowly, so as not to shake him, she turned over. "Kit, how are you feeling?" she muttered. His attempt to say, "like crap," was met with a quiet wheeze and some mouth movement. She tilted her head sideways. Naruto indicated his throat by slowly bending his head back. "Oh, water, right." She rose slowly, being careful not to startle him, and left the room. She returned with a glass of water, which she placed to his lips. He drank it with gratitude. "Like crap," he said at last. He was still hardly able to speak. His answer made her laugh a little. "Simply put, I'm happy you survived. Officially, you've created history. Finally, one of your dreams has come true. Aren't you happy?" He gave a small laugh. "Are you still in pain?" He gave a small nod. "This is it." She gave him some water and put 2 pills in his mouth. He took a swallow. "You're fortunate that I have aspirin on hand in case my chakra runs low. If not, you'd have to start over." He moved his arm slowly and removed the covers. He sat up, moving slowly and winced occasionally when he went too quickly. He eventually got up and started walking down the hallway. He remarked, "I don't recall being this tall." Now she had to raise her head slightly to meet his gaze. She chuckled a little and remarked, "Betcha don't remember having a tail either." With a sigh, he continued. "In any case, where are you going?" "Bathroom," he said nonchalantly. It was logical. 2 days had passed while he lay there unconscious. He wouldn't make it, though, if he continued to move at this rate. "Allow me to assist you," she said, taking his arm over her shoulder and guiding him down the corridor. As they hurried down the hall, he smiled at her with gratitude. He took his arm from over her shoulder as they approached the door. "I'll handle it from here. Sure you don't require assistance?" A door slammed in her face was her response. She sat down and waited for the scream while laughing. It arrived after a minute or two. She started giggling. He must have glanced at himself in the mirror. The door opened a few seconds later, and he emerged in astonishment. I looked completely different. No one at home. He paused. No one in Konoha will know who I am. He was now smiling, clearly happy with the modifications. As it fluttered from side to side, she smiled and said, I see you like your tail. Yes, it's fantastic. The pain was nearly worth it. And you were correct. 1,000 pounds is nothing anymore. She gave him a blank look. You mean that all along, those damned things were activated? God, it's no wonder you're hurting. They were crushing you. She made a ram seal, and his weight seals glowed red before fading. No waits until after you've recovered. But, no buts. You've spent the last 2 days unconscious. He scowled. We're going to the library for lessons on sealing until you've healed after we get some food. 2 days. Is that all? I assumed it had been a week or so. He then smiled. However, that explains why I'm so hungry. Are you able to get us some food? She smiled twice. They limped down to the kitchen after she swung his arm back over her shoulder and said, I'm so glad to hear you say that. When I had to drag your sorry ass to your bedroom, it was understandable why you were so heavy. As she helped him into a chair, her hardened exterior returning to its place, she complained to him about his weights and said, I almost dropped you 3 times. Now, we need a big-ass breakfast to celebrate, she said, bringing out pots and pans. After 15 minutes or so, she had rice, dango, ramen, and rice balls on the table. He took a bite of ramen while she got up to get some tea. Tastes like crap, he remarked in jest. In fact, the taste was better than it had been. After the change, his taste buds must have become more sensitive. Immediately, he had the sensation that 2 pebbles had embedded themselves in his forehead and then fallen to the ground as powder. Check to see if I can give you any more breakfast or painkillers, she let out a scream. He gave a malevolent cackle and then coughed. He had been talking excessively. It's fantastic, I was kidding. Better than ever. Naruto had to mutter once more, she scowled. Medications must have worn off. The drawback of being a Kyuubi is that. She placed 2 more pills in front of him. Unless you get really strong painkillers, they wear off in no time. These can kill a moose, or if it survives, let it leap off a cliff and claim that the experience was enjoyable when it lands. It ought to work. He put them in his mouth and carried on eating. He took a quick sip of the tea she had placed in front of him before carrying on with his meal. I was just curious if you were aware of how long you will live now. He shook his head and glanced up at her. This is how I would phrase it. A good number of millennia will be visible to you. He began to choke on his food. She removed the food from his throat by reaching over and giving him a back slap. That's a long time, she said with a simple smile. The good news is that your body grew older throughout the change. I am therefore equivalent to roughly 25 human years. You're most likely in your 20s. The good news is that you and I are close enough in age that it won't be deemed incorrect. He smiled. That was excellent. Additionally, you are of legal drinking age. That's even better, then. Naruto was at last feeling well enough to move around freely after they finished their meal. Alright, let's move on to sealing lessons. She made a face and said, talk about boring. Naruto chuckled. Then you have a reason to thank me. She tilted her head sideways in perplexity. My half. Demon side is already aware of everything. I got it all. She jumped across the table and gave him a neck hug. Thank heavens. To avoid having to drag it out, I would skip parts of the lesson because I detested learning those. You have the day off, so you can do anything you want. Aside from trains. Knowing what was on his mind, she said, we'll do that later. He was eager to test drive his new body. On the plus side, I think you've outgrown everything you own. He looked down and saw that his long, sleeved shirt was elbow length and his pants resembled manpress. A loud tearing sound came from the back of his shirt as he bent his arm. She smiled malevolently. Who do you think is going shopping? He let out a moan. Before she pulled him from the cave, Hitomi showed him how to return to a normal human. His eyes ached from the sunlight at first, but he soon adjusted. Kid, there's another reason we left here. We're returning to Konoha. She said bluntly, you're going to use a bushin to fake your death. We're getting you out of those clothes first, though. They fled to a nearby small village after Hitomi changed into a human. Although there were no shinobi in the village, there was a small shopping area where they discovered some clothing for Naruto. He was wearing a dark blue shirt over a fishnet shirt and black pants. Knowing they needed to reach the forest in front of Konoha before sunset, they turned around and tossed their bags in their cave. They arrived a few hours later. It took them half as long the first time. About a mile from the village, Hitomi stopped him and gave Naruto instruction in what she called Shukatsu Kage Bushin no Jutsu. Bloody Shadow Clone Jutsu. She smiled as they ran another half mile. We intend to spar. Naruto nodded, and they began fighting. You're going to do that when I call time. The Anbu became aware of the fight due to the consequences of some of their major jutsus. Hitomi glanced at him as she felt the Anbu approaching. Achieve it. He smiled. When Naruto created the clone, it burst into a pool of blood. The amazing thing was that it was actual blood that had been created by multiplying a drop of Naruto's blood. After landing and examining the bloody mass, the Anbu members collected a sample and returned to the village. When Naruto and Hitomi realized they were out of earshot, they both started laughing as they ran. When they returned to the cave at last, Hitomi splattered some of her blood on the top and they entered together. Officially, Naruto was free. Except for 2 people on this planet, everyone thought he was dead. When the Anbu leader saw the blood test results, he was stunned. It was unbelievable to him. Naruto could not have died. Before opening the door, he stood up and knocked. Kakashi, to whom do I owe this visit? Tsunade said as she raised her gaze to him. With tears streaming down his cheeks, he lowered his mask and placed the open folder on her desk. My team went to investigate after hearing the sound of a fight. Blood was discovered. Someone had apparently exploded. Those are the blood test results. She gasped as she looked down. No way was possible. The quantity of blood at the discovery site indicates that Mr. Uzumaki's body disintegrated when it exploded, leaving only his blood, indicating that he was blown from the inside out. The blood matches Naruto Uzumaki exactly. Condition: deceased. Tsunade's eyes began to well up with tears. Go. She gave up trying to gather herself. Update the bingo books, please, she said. Don't tell the villagers. He reapplied his mask. Kakashi. He halted in his tracks as he approached the door. He nodded and turned to leave. Put him on the Kia stone. All right, Kit. Greetings from hell, she said. Activate your weights and double them. Feeling the strain, he did. But she burst into a cloud of smoke. She had a slightly red face this time, and he sighed and shook his head before making the bushin again. Even with the weights doubled, he was still able to move, but very, very slowly. Then she rushed toward him. He let out a cry and ducked away. He was fortunate to do so. In a cloud of dust, the wall behind him exploded. He noticed that she had ruined the wall when he looked up. Naruto saw it grow back into position. All right, let's clarify this. The goal is to stay put. She kicked him once more while screaming. He swung his arm up in a side block this time. She smiled. Much better. She swung her foot at the opposite side of his head after turning. He grabbed her ankle. She tried to kick his other side using his grip. Once more, he grabbed her ankle. Instead of punching his face, she struck a wall of chakra. She was unable to escape even after fire blasts. He smiled and remarked, "It's the ultimate defense. This time, for real, not like Kaden from Neji." She packed chakra into her punch and repeatedly slammed her fist into it, saying, "I noticed." She was pinned to the wall on the opposite side of the room by spikes that she didn't anticipate it sending out. "You are aware that I only dressed to prevent you from becoming alarmed, right?" He gave a nod. "Then it wasn't a good idea to pin me up by my own clothing." His eyes widened and the spikes vanished. "Nice move." He protruded his tongue, but before she could catch it, he drew it back in. She fell clumsily to the ground as he swung his leg through her ankles. She scowled as she looked up at him. He started giggling. "Good going, Grace." He laughed at his moniker for her and went on. She kicked his foot and said, "I'm sorry, but I can only give you a 3 for that landing. That wasn't pleasant. I'm not a kind individual. I'm not even a person, really, huh?" She had to retract her tongue before he could grab it after she stuck it out. She kicked his chest and got back up. Once more, a wall of chakra stopped it in its tracks. Quit that." She began attacking him from all sides, employing all of the jutsu and taijutsu techniques she was familiar with. They were all unable to penetrate the chakra. Compared to steel, this is 100 times stronger. He smiled, but it vanished when she kicked him into the air, using his shield to get a better blow. "You aren't breaking through." He was surrounded by strands of chakra that began to spin. He went crazy. The primary lotus was this one. He covered both of them with his chakra shield. All that occurred when they struck the ground was the creation of a deep hole and a deep bass that sounded like a gong being struck. She gazed at him in wonder as he removed his shield from around her. How did it hold up against the lotus primary? With wide eyes, she uttered, "That's impossible to defend against." "My chakra slows down the lotus by spinning in the opposite direction. It slowed down enough to protect me by the time I hit the ground," he said with a smile. She went to attack him once more after shaking her head. It was ineffective. Hours passed while they persisted, encouraged by their limitless chakra supply. After exchanging blows, Naruto eventually lost the ability to raise his shield. Good. No shield. He smiled and changed from his human to his half-demon form, saying, "Now I'm going to wipe the floor with you." Naruto sensed the energy pulsating through him. "Want to place a wager?" And they attacked once more. Kick for kick, blow for blow. They were both bruised and battered after about an additional hour. "Have you gotten used to those weights?" He gave a nod. Naruto moaned but followed her instructions, saying, "Good, add another 500 pounds. He moaned once more as his beaten body began to feel the effects of the extra weight. "Did that hurt?" He gave another nod. "Good." Then she rushed at him. He attempted to block the attack by raising his arm, but he was unable to move quickly enough and was struck in the face. He was unable to raise his arm quickly enough to block the blow when she kicked him in the ribs. He heard a crack in the healing of some ribs. So it went on for some time. Naruto vowed that he would have to break and reset every bone in his body. It stopped at last. He slowly raised his head off the floor as he felt his weights being deactivated. Right now, he was lying flat on his back. She helped him up while wearing a pitying expression. He whispered to her, "I get over one pain, and get another." As he limped down the hall, she laughed. She pushed him into the library after walking him all the way to his bedroom. "Let's move on to a lesson. I take it you want to be Hokage?" He gave a nod. "Good. You will now pursue a study of politics." He moaned, "Then you can go to bed and we'll have dinner. This is your updated training plan. Kitsune Jutsu training will begin tomorrow morning." According to his watch, he was roused the following morning at 5 a.m. and thrown into the kitchen to eat. Before beginning training, he had 20 minutes to locate, prepare, and consume food. "Alright, let's start our jutsu training. You must first learn the demon seals," she began to demonstrate. Whereas the boar's palms were flat against one another, facing down, the bird's middle fingers were protruding rather than folded. His bottom hand was flat out, dog. His laced fingers protruded above the backs of his hands, dragon. 2 fingers protruded from the bottom, hare. Monkey, with fingers pointing in opposing directions and both palms flat against one another. The ox's middle finger was up, the horse's pinkies were pointing down, the serpent's thumb and pinky protruded, the tiger's pinky was sticking up, the ram had 3 fingers instead of 2, and the rat had 3 fingers instead of 1. "Do you recall everything?" He gave a nod. "Good, since I won't do it again." The demon Tora seal was created by her. Now for a weak Kitsune fire jutsu. Kitsune Faya. Fire of the fox. And she extinguished a deep blue flame. He smiled and made the demon Tora seal as well. "Your turn." Kitsune Faya. She was astounded by this boy for the second time that week. It was at least double the size of what she expelled. He wasn't doing much work, apparently, either. She tossed a stone the size of her fist into the flames. He paused and stared at the rock in blankness. In fact, what was a lava puddle now? Let's start with a history lesson. The Kyuubi discovered that their fire had a weakness when they first arrived on Earth, despite their knowledge of their power over fire. It goes out if you splash it with water. Cover it with dirt or sand, and it disappears. Thus, they acquired the ability to master those components. Like so. She sealed it again. Boar demon. As she uttered the words, Kitsune Kozui, fox flood, a stream of water erupted from her mouth and crashed into the tiny lava pool. After steaming, it finally reverted to stone. She melted a bigger stone she found. She made the demon dragon and boar seal and said, "Now for ice." Kitsune Kouzuitouketetsu. The lava became a block of ice, frozen Kitsune flood. A typical version of these and the Kitsune version differ in that the Kitsune version has significantly increased the power. Better yet, no demon jutsus can be replicated by the Sharingan. He smiled. That would be useful. An hour later, he had the ice formed after some initial difficulties. She smiled and let out a sigh. "That's the last one," she said hastily, performing a demon ox and boar. Dosakir Yuu Kitsune. Kitsune avalanche. With a sick sloping sound, mud smashed into a wall after shooting out of her mouth. "Your turn." His first shot had the same effect. "For the second day in a row, you have amazed me. I didn't learn those 4 as quickly as you did." Hitomi turned and left the room, gesturing for him to follow. He did, and they made their way to the door. She continued until she was only a few feet from the stairs that led to the upper level. She drew the Kyuubi kanji on the wall while biting her thumb. Before the wall vanished, the outline of a door glowed. It was replaced by a line of swords. Reaching inside, she took a plain silver one and fastened it to her belt loop. The swords vanished into the wall when she pulled a string that was fastened to the side. Hitomi is wearing jeans today. After hearing a click, Hitomi inserted her 9 tails into 9 holes and then removed them. There was a black sword behind that. She grabbed it with her outstretched hand and gave it to him. This is yours now. You can call it Deizu Kuraikako. The dark history of death. He grasped it. He sensed the strength it held. The blade was jet black, with a dragon's mouth gaping at the end of the hilt. A tiny pink stone was lodged beneath the dragon's mouth. Its sheath was black, too. He fastened it to his trousers with the loop that protruded from the side. So that's why she told me to get these pants. As he tied them on, he understood her strategy. After that, she led him back to the training room and closed the door. There will be a new rule going forward. During our training, you are not permitted to talk or make any noise. I can hear you coming a mile away because you're so loud. Naruto objected, saying, I'm going to add 25 pounds for each noise you made. Right now, you're formally undergoing training. He sighed and felt his weights grow a bit heavier. All protests are to be held onto and said after I'm done with you. Any sound at all. She smiled gloomily. Naruto nodded, fighting the urge to sigh once more. Additionally, I'm adding training in Kenjutsu to your list. He had a puzzled expression on his face, but he was unable to ask why, so he had to cut himself with that sword anyway. The sword flashed red and then went dark again. She extended her arm and took the hilt. 4 daggers sprang out horizontally as the hilt transformed into a blade and cut her hand. She dropped it. No one can use it or steal it anymore. Aside from you, that is. He made a "oh" with his mouth. She drew her own sword and began instructing him in combat. They then proceeded to training in Genjutsu and Taijutsu. He learned the Kyuubi style and how to use his tails and claws in combat in Taijutsu. He studied all types of Genjutsu, both human and demon, and learned how to use his tails to summon them. He studied the forbidden scrolls of every village to learn all the Kenjutsu. He gained all the political knowledge he required, and his weights were increased to roughly 10 tons. Naruto paid rent 3 times a month to Hitomi for teaching him how to cook. Eventually, his chakra supply grew to the point where Hitomi could spend weeks at a time outside of her cell. He also read the whole Kyuubi family library, learned his father's most well-known method, and became an expert in all medical specialties, including Deizu Kuraikako, the jutsu of Shunshin no flickering body. It took only 4 years, 6 months later, from the end of the previous chapter. From the corner of her eye, Hitomi glanced at her partner. He would undoubtedly make great progress. He had acquired all 9 tails in just 4 years and was almost ready for his 10th and final one. About 1/4 of the way there was Hitomi. If she had ever seen a prodigy, this one was it. The sole disadvantage was that, as a result of her training and the lack of use, he had long since lost the ability to use his voice and eventually stopped using it altogether. About a month ago, they discovered this and had to visit Tsunade to have them fixed. Her eyes shifted into a scowl. They had been mercenaries for the past 6 months, which allowed Naruto to practice his abilities on the battlefield and in a real battle. They had recently completed and received payment for one near the Leaf Village, so they reasoned that since they were nearby, they might as well continue and travel. Because of his black sword and the fact that he typically killed people with a single blow, he gained the nickname, Deizu Deki, Death's Apprentice, in just 6 months. People also claimed that he was training to become the next god of death. She frowned at him and remarked, "You know, if you weren't so afraid of doing it yourself, we wouldn't have to be making this trip." In front of her, a tiny fire dragon that resembled a salamander with wings began writing. It spelled out letters that lingered, using a flame from its tail. She sighed and shook her head, saying, "I'll screw it up. Return to my mind." She nodded and walked away, saying, "I need to get past the guards." His tails and claws were retracted, and his ears changed to human ears on the side of his head, giving him a typical human appearance. "Halt, in Konoha. What kind of business do you run?" Naruto indicated that he was unable to speak by shaking his head and pointing to his throat. The Anbu gave a head nod. "All right." He knocked twice on the big steel doors and shouted, "Open up." A Junin, Hinata, specifically, was standing on the other side of them, and Naruto was relieved that he was wearing a bamboo hat because otherwise she might have recognized him. "A Junin will escort you to the Hokage's office." "Follow me," she said, her stutter and shyness long since gone, and he followed her through the streets until she led him all the way to the building's entrance. Not much had changed since he had left, except that the people appeared older. She looked like she had seen a ghost, and when they finally arrived at the Hokage Tower, Naruto mouthed a thank you to her, lifting his hat just enough to let her see his whisker marks, but he pulled it back down and would have laughed at her face if he could have. He entered and stopped at a desk, where Shizune was sitting, and she looked up at him. Tsunade looked up as she said, "Oh, you must be the visitor. Hold on, I'll escort you up to Hokage Sama's office." She left the desk and walked around it, gesturing for him to follow. He did, and they ascended several flights of stairs before reaching a door. Shizune knocked on the door and gestured for him to continue. She asked bluntly, "Who are you?" And he just stared at her. Before closing the door, Shizune said, "He's mute." Naruto snapped and the lock clicked, and then the room glowed green. Tsunade's eyes widened. She knew only one person who could have caused the room to glow green, but he was dead. She shook her head and sighed, then looked up at him. He pretended to be writing something on air, and she got the hint and gave him a pen and paper. Her eyes widened as she said, "I'm the Deizu Deki." It seemed that a boy had appeared around 6 months prior and had the ability to kill anyone. He would simply swipe at anyone who stood in his way and cut it. For the first time since she learned of Naruto's death, she laughed a little as she said, "In my training, I was forced to go without using my voice. At all. After 4 years, my sensei finally allowed me to talk again. However, we found out I can no longer talk, and I'm not exactly brave enough to try doing it to myself, because I'd end up screwing up somehow." To make it even funnier, this teenager had defeated people who were thought to be invincible and had won handily, but was terrified to perform a simple medical procedure on himself. She jumped into a defensive position, but he simply reached up and pulled his hat off, meeting her with blue eyes and blonde hair. "Okay, I'll help you, but you're going to have to fork over for it." He nodded. "I need you to take off your hat." She looked at his neck, prodded and prodded, then sighed. Whoa. He's just missing whiskers, or he'd look just like Naruto. But his eyes weren't slitted. Naruto began to panic when he saw the recognition in her eyes. "Shirt needs to go too. I still can't see your neck well." He was in a panic at this point. "You could have done this yourself, but no, gonna mess up, you said. Look where it's gotten you now, genius. If you're caught, it's on your own head." She looked at his neck, made a few seals, and then touched his neck with her green chakra. He felt nothing, but when Tsunade pulled her hand back, she was smiling. "Shut up." Naruto reached down and pulled the shirt over his head, hoping she wouldn't notice the seal on his stomach. He knew she would become curious if he concealed it with a genjutsu like he did his whiskers, so he had no choice. "All right, buddy. Now cough up." "Ah, arigato, ba-chan." He realized his error at that very moment, and her eyes widened as she glanced at him before turning to face his stomach, where the seal was. She only managed to utter, "N," before Naruto crossed the room and covered her mouth with his hand. She was looking at him with wide eyes and hadn't even seen him move when Naruto made a few demon seals, which caused the room to glow purple before it faded. "This room isn't soundproofed, just sealed," he whispered. "Naruto, is that really you?" he asked, nodding. "I thought you died. There was your blood splattered all across these trees. Those idiots at the hospital said it was your blood. They probably just made it up." Naruto sighed. She approached him and threw her arms around him, crying. "That was my blood." Tsunade retreated from him and gave him a perplexed look. "I needed to be taken out of the bingo books so I could travel freely around the world, so I faked my death. Sensei taught me a way to make it seem like my body did explode." Tsunade asked, "Who's your sensei?" Naruto sighed. "Avoid screaming." The nine-tailed Kyuubi was standing with her head resting on his shoulder, and Tsunade had no choice but to scream. Both Naruto and Hitomi clutched their ears and grunted in agony, though it appeared as though Naruto was holding the top of his head. "Why would I?" she asked in disbelief. Tsunade backed up against a wall and said, "It's Kyuubi." Then she recalled that she had screamed at him over that, but she couldn't remember the name of the Yukai. Hitomi said, "Hitomi." Tsunade watched in disbelief as Naruto unlocked his genjutsu, exposing his 9 tails, whiskers, claws, and ears, as well as his 6 feet 3 inches stature. In the past, Naruto and Tsunade had stood side by side. Naruto's face loomed over her as she looked up. He chuckled a little and said, "I see a growth spurt kicked in." "Yes." Naruto scowled and asked, "So, have you returned to Konoha?" "No." Tsunade's expression dimmed. "I have to eliminate Akatsuki and Orochimaru. I'm taking Sasuke back to Konoha with me." Her expression darkened even further. Completed. Akatsuki came to recruit after hearing about a 24-year-old kid killing like it was nothing. That day, they lost 2 members, he said with a smile. "I've moved on from Akatsuki. When they see that I have Hitomi with me on a half-assed seal in a nearly physical form, I'm just waiting for them to send their people. Then, I'll kill the rest of them," Tsunade said, shaking her head. This child was unique. "As for payment, I can actually make you 25 and stop that genjutsu you're using from being a genjutsu." Her eyes widened. Could that have happened? How? He merely smiled. "It's a secret. Naruto hurried past a few seals. Tsunade recognized a few, but not the others. At last, he took a scroll from his pocket and began writing more quickly than she could follow. A few seconds later, he took hold of Tsunade's head by the sides. After holding them for a moment, he withdrew his hands and a sickly gray substance emerged. After slamming his hands into the scroll, Naruto resumed his drawing. After several more seals, he rolled up the scroll and began writing in blood across her face before touching her temples with his index fingers. Tsunade lost consciousness. When she arrived, she noticed Kyuubi and Naruto seated in chairs in front of her desk. "Come on around at last. It's about time." She glanced around and noticed that she felt more energized than ever. She looked at Naruto as she hopped up. "Have you got a mirror?" When she realized her voice was a little higher pitched than before, she let out a little squeak of surprise. Naruto took one from his rear pocket. She stared in wonder as she peered inside. She was 25 years old and had the same appearance as before. "How did you do it?" Tsunade inquired in awe. "I sealed the age into a scroll after taking it." He smiled and said, "It causes the scroll to age at an amazing rate until it eventually crumbles into nothingness. Additionally, are you aware of Jiraiya's location?" She nodded. "I'm going to do the same for him." Naruto shook his head, saying, "Bathhouse. He ought to have guessed." "Could you please send for him?" he said with a wry smile on his face. "I can't exactly leave the room." She sent him an anbu over the intercom after nodding. When Jiraiya arrived, she was thrown in so that the room could be sealed again, which was done right away. Before the elderly man could object, he went through the procedure again. As Tsunade watched in awe, his hair started to recede and his hairline grew out, and his wrinkles started to disappear. "That's incredible," she exclaimed. "He looks just like he did when we were just promoted to Sannin." Naruto gave a nod. Jiraiya realized what had happened when he arrived as well. He then turned to face Tsunade. "Gosh, you're not old, I'm not either. Where did you get the knowledge to do that?" He jumped up and asked. Tsunade simply gestured to his rear. He froze as he turned. Kyuubi and Naruto. Hitomi. He was corrected by Hitomi. But Jiraiya was staring up at Naruto when she heard her. "Good lord, I don't think so." Naruto smiled and said, "You look exactly like your father." "Thank you. This is Hitomi, my girlfriend, by the way." Also referred to as the Kyuubi. Their jaws dropped to the ground. "No way," Jiraiya uttered. "Wait, how did she escape anyhow?" Tsunade inquired. All Naruto said was, "Orochimaru." They both let out a sigh. The good news is that he hasn't assumed Sasuke's body. Before allowing him to take control of his body, Sasuke somehow persuaded him that he could become stronger. Naruto sighed, "So we have another 3 years before it's too late. I'll retrieve him. I must leave." He caused Hitomi to vanish in a cloud of smoke. He glanced at the two before opening the door. "Goodbye." After saying that, he opened the door and left the room. "I believe I can find a way to return to the gates." "Arigato, Hokage." "Sama." He mouthed. "Ba-chan," as he glanced down both hallways before turning and heading for the stairs. He noticed that no one was on the stairs when he peered over the railing. Excellent. He fell to the bottom after jumping over the railing. In the hopes that no one would discover the crater he had left, he straightened up and left through the door. At last, he arrived at his destination. Ramen Ichiraku. He entered and sat down in a chair. 3 miso ramen bowls. He sobbed. Hitomi entered and sat down next to Naruto, who had made a bushin in the alley by the stand so that it would appear as though she had walked in rather than just materialized. "Why are you in a place like this, a moron like you?" Trying not to laugh, she asked. "Stop talking. If you survive, you will be forced to work for them once more after we are caught. Stop talking. If..." He jerked his head over his shoulder and slapped his hand over her mouth. Behind them, Hinata, Ino, and Tenten sat, gazing at him. Naruto coughed up for the 3 bowls that Tuchi had placed in front of him. He then handed Hitomi a bowl, and they began to eat. Naruto wanted to order 50 bowls, of course, but that would be too clear. He was about to get up when Tenten, Ino, and Hinata approached and took their places in front of him. "Hey," said Hinata. "Hello, ladies, and good-bye, ladies," he said as he got to his feet. He was pushed back in his chair by Hinata. "I don't believe so. Why do you have whiskers?" Naruto gave his chin a rub. "Well, I was shaving the other day and lost my razor downstream, and I haven't been able to. With the exception of 6 hairs, your face is completely hairless." "Really? Whoa, you have some really good eyes to see that I only had 6? He laughed at his own joke. "I thought I'd have a few thousand." Over time, Hinata developed into a formidable force. In addition to being crowned the person with the fastest reflexes anyone has seen since some deceased Junin. You have a fairly powerful person when you combine that with the fact that she is the mistress of the Hyugas. She attempted to grab his hat with her outstretched hand, but it was unsuccessful. His head was barely able to reach her wrist. It was less than a quarter of an inch from her finger. Pulling her hand back, she remarked, "You're no wanderer." He scowled. "I don't think I ever stated that I was. What's your name? And why do you refuse to remove your hat?" "I like my hat." "Remove your hat, and the girl will not perish," Ino said with a malevolent grin. He let out a sigh. Yes, very well." He removed his hat, realizing that he was in a bad spot. He was wearing his hat, so he hadn't bothered to cover his ears. He triggered his bloodline as they gasped. No jutsu Hiraishin. He rushed to the ally, picked up all 4 of the girls, and sat them down in their designated seats. He stayed because he didn't want to turn into another nuke.nin. The Hiraishin was deactivated, and they gazed around in awe. Tenten gave him a startled look. The Hiraishin no jutsu was that. The 4th was the only one who knew how to do that. It was his bloodline, actually, Naruto stated. He detested it when people confused information about his father. "So you're the son of the Yondaime?" Their eyes all widened in surprise. The other 3 because they recognized him, and Hitomi and Naruto because they knew they were in trouble. "Naruto? No longer. Now I'm called the Daizu Deki." Ino erupted in laughter. "Yes, exactly, Dobi. According to legend, the 24-year-old Daizu Deki can easily kill anyone. Additionally, he is supposed to have 9 tails. He has a black sword, too. All you have is a cheap plastic item." Throughout, Ino was giggling. "And I see no tails." "Tenten has gone to notify the Anbu, correct?" Naruto spoke abruptly. They gave him a blank stare. Tenten vanished in a cloud of smoke after he stepped through her stomach. "Very well," he said, reaching for his hat, "I'll take my leave now." Hinata burned the hat after running through some seals. Now, that wasn't pleasant. Hitomi merely smiled. She nodded toward the alley's entrance, which was adorned with pitchforks, torches, and an excessive number of Anbu, Junin, Chunin, and even Genin. Tenten got a mob together. Naruto smiled. "Oh, that's fun. I guess I get to get my retribution after all." Hinata and Ino both chuckled. "Yes, exactly. Are you not the Daizu Deki?" "Yes," he replied, pulling out his sword. Naruto's 9 tails emerged and gripped the sword, which appeared to be blazing with black fire. They gazed in wonder. Hinata exclaimed, "You truly are the Daizu Deki. You weren't lying." Ino had his mouth hanging open. "I'll defeat Orochimaru before bringing Sasuke back," he said. "You and Sakura can fight over him from there," and then he raised his sword. Hinata triggered her Byakugan and said, "Move." Naruto turned to face Hitomi. "This is foolish. You will be caught. This is similar to the riot that we put down last month. It will be simple. We also have every rank above Genin this time. Only 3 young Genin from Grass were involved the last time. Even for Genin, they were weak." Naruto hesitated. He said gravely, "I want to do this one alone, Hitomi." Hitomi nodded and let out a sigh before vanishing. "Who was that?" asked Hinata. "My girlfriend. Her name is Hitomi, but she is also referred to as the Kyuubi. Make sure that's fixed if you guys are still alive." Hinata snarled and launched her strongest blow. Hake Rokujuichi Shiki Sanbyaku. Divine 360. 1 strikes as the divination field. At about 160, Naruto dropped his sword after taking all the blows. Around 250, his body went limp, and Hinata's blows were the only thing keeping him suspended in midair. 360, he might be regarded as deceased. His body lay lifeless on the ground, proving that he was indeed dead. Or so she believed. "That hurt, dear lord. How did your crush on me turn out?" He rubbed his stomach and mumbled. Hinata's eyes went wide with surprise. There was no way. No one could make it through that. "How? Why are you still alive?" Naruto smiled. "For me, that doesn't work. Even though I've already closed all of my tenketsu, chakra is still being pushed through them. If I let them go entirely." He merely gave a small chuckle. Now Hinata had to know. Let's just say bad things will happen. "Like what? Have you heard about the windmill village in Wind Country being destroyed?" she asked, nodding. "There, I got to know the sound 4. They nearly got me, but I lost control of my chakra and let go of my tenketsu. With regret," he said, "the ensuing explosion destroyed. No. Annihilated the village. And everyone in it." Hinata heard Naruto whisper, almost hysterically, "I didn't mean to kill all those people." But when Naruto got back up, the crowd erupted in cheers for his head to be cut off his body. Naruto made the demon serpent seal after saying, "I don't want to kill you, Hinata." Hinata felt her arms and legs snap together, and she fell onto her back, with Ino falling next to her. "When I'm about a mile away, you'll be let go." He sensed Konohamaru standing behind him, ready to kill with a kunai. "So will everyone that I used to know that's in or around this area." "I don't want to kill you, Konohamaru." Naruto turned around and said, "Set it down." He saw who it was when he looked up. Ni-chan. He gave Naruto a hug as he spoke. He was pushed away by Naruto. "I'm sorry, child. I must maintain my appearance, remain here, and until Hinata and Ino are able to move, no matter what." Konohamaru nodded. Before he hopped across to the building on the opposite side of the street and landed in front of them, he said, "Congratulations on getting Chunin, by the way." Ready to kill, they turned. It wasn't a riot. A bloodbath was just waiting to happen. In their fury, this mob had completely lost control and would not stop until they had their blood. In a burst of black flame, Naruto's sword materialized as he extended his hand. He made sure everyone heard him yell, "Remember the child you abused, just for having a demon within him. Remember my name? The Dezu Decchi is me." He screamed and rushed forward, slashing the genin who attempted to remove him. Pitchforks were then hurled at him by some villagers. He made the demon Tora seal and blew, causing the pitchfork's metal to melt upon contact with the dark blue flame. The wood was crisped before it hit the ground. It dawned on him then that he was flanked by a few Chunin. Naruto began to swing his sword, killing with each blow. None of them missed. He was surrounded by Anbu, and one of them dropped several clay water jars. Then they all shouted, "Suiro no Jutsu! Water prison!" As they pushed their hands, which were supporting the prison, together, the water grew into a huge ball around him before contracting. Naruto merely chuckled. "That's it. How depressing. The powerful Anbu of Konoha are so weak." A voice outside chuckled and removed their mask. Neji was the one. "I see that you have sealed all of your tenketsu. You must have been affected by Hinata." Naruto's laughter increased. "Well done." He smiled and said, "She struck me with Hake Sanbyaku Rokujuichi Shiki." Neji's jaw fell open. "Fortunately, I am immune to Hyuga techniques, and I simply absorbed her chakra that she sent into me." Neji scowled. "Anyway, Dezu Decchi, you can't get out of here." Naruto chuckled once more. "You forget. I am the Yondaimi's son." He smiled and said, "Hiraishin no Jutsu was actually a bloodline. But the Rasengan, however, isn't." Naruto's tails resurfaced, forming a 180-degree angle around him after he had concealed them to prevent anyone from attempting to grab or attack them. A Rasengan was then formed on each tip, followed by 2 more on his hands, knees, elbows, and tops of his feet. "I have 17 Rasengans in all." "Really? Do you think you can withstand that?" More chakra was added when a few Junin ran up and touched the sphere. Then more Anbu showed up and helped as well. Neji chuckled. "But there are at least 30 of us," he said, looking around. 39, specifically. "It doesn't matter. 390. The same distinction. I'm still capable of defeating you all." The Rasengans subsided. "But I'll work something out for you. I'll only use my sword to give you a fighting chance." He pulled his sword out of its sheath and dropped into a stance. Before leaping out of the prison, he leapt to his feet and made a hole in the top. Simply put, the water fell in on itself. The Anbu got to work examining seals right away. They all sobbed when they heard, "Kanashibari no Jutsu." Body freeze. Naruto felt his body tense up and then give out. He let out a moan. "Dear God, never give up, people." Neji approached him with suspiciously narrowed eyes and said, "I'm actually trying to get rid of one of your threats, yet here you are acting like I'm the enemy." "What do you mean?" With a wave of chakra, he said, "It doesn't matter." He got to his feet with ease. "Because I have to leave. Time to finish up." All of a sudden, the ANBU's masks vanished. Despite holding a stack of masks, Naruto appeared to be motionless. "Well, I don't know anyone." "All right, excellent, Neji." Neji fell to the ground, straight as a board, as he made the demon serpent sign, saying, "I don't want to have to kill you so. I'll share with you what I said to Hinata. When I'm a mile away, you'll be able to move." Naruto then prepared his sword and fired in a circle in front of the entire Anbu. Clinging to their stomachs, they all collapsed to the ground. In any case, I was meant to freeze everyone who knew me in the entire village. The crowd began to bomb rush Naruto after realizing they hadn't stopped him. "I guess I still haven't mastered that." With a sigh, Naruto placed his sword beside his left shoulder. Goodbye. A good majority of Konoha. He swung his sword horizontally after first glancing around the crowd to make sure he didn't know anyone. Deizu Kuraikako. He sobbed. A huge black crescent moon approached the throng. It appeared to be a genjutsu to them. That since they kept rushing at it, nothing as strong as that could be made. Naruto muttered, idiots. The whole crowd was split in two by the black moon. The torsos began striking the floor, spattering blood everywhere. The streets were almost flooded by the free flow of blood. Ayame and Tuchi both ran out. Tuchi shoved Ayame back into the stand after she screamed. He turned to face Naruto, who was wearing a dejected expression. Why? Naruto approached him. As a child, they made numerous attempts to murder me. They even succeeded once or twice, and the third time, the hospital refused to take a demon, so he had to heal me himself. I would always come back to life thanks to my healing abilities, which I later discovered were the Kyuubi, and remained that way until the third could affect me. I was beaten, burned, and almost frozen in an ice block. Someone struck my hand with a sledgehammer and then an axe, causing me to lose all of my fingers. And that's just the beginning. Since I have to leave, I genuinely don't feel like going into detail. I don't want to kill anymore, and more Anbu are coming. He turned. Hold on, Naruto. I was just wondering how strong you are. Are you familiar with Akatsuki? The man gave a nod. Tuchi's eyes widened as he said, I killed 2 of their stronger men in 3 minutes flat. Although he had little knowledge of ninja life, he was aware that these men belonged to the elite. It seems that no one was able to defeat any of them, at least not until Naruto. After taking Tuchi's hand, Naruto placed a Ryu sack inside. Here. For the clients you recently lost. It will last you until I return. Tuchi nodded and went back inside. You mean I never saw you? Naruto chuckled a little. All right, he said, turning to head toward the gates. When they saw their fellows falling to pieces on them, the other mob that was attempting to approach from behind had scattered. His own joke made him laugh. It's funny, even though it's sick. An Anbu landed in front of him, and he scowled. I no longer want to kill. Please, move, Naruto said, the blood odor beginning to burn his nose. The man took off his dog mask and shook his head. Kakashi. Sensei. Tears were streaming down the man's face. You are the one, Naruto. I had to say I was sorry. I trained Sasuke, trying to persuade him that he was strong enough, because I believed he was most likely to go missing on us. That didn't work, and we broke up. I believed that you might have become Hokage if you had stayed between Jiraiya and me. Naruto sighed, but now I realize that leaving was the best thing that ever happened to you. Kakashi, what is your current age? Confused, he looked up. 34. Why? With a sigh, Naruto sped through some seals. He needed to do this quickly. In a flash, Naruto sealed 14 years into a scroll. After a few moments, Kakashi regained consciousness. What did you do? Naruto smiled. In a technical sense, I am now older than you. Welcome to being 20 again. Huh. What a fantastic response for a person with his level of intelligence and strength. I sealed you off for 14 years. Kakashi's eyes widened. You now have the body you had when you were 20. Kakashi came up with his plan and said, I'll say we're even, because I'm going to need those 14 years to use on Orochimaru. Leave now, he said, laughing. Naruto realized he was kidding when he said, don't return until you've killed some major people with big names. He approached him and gave him a hug. In some ways, this man was similar to his brother. After saying, I'll be back, Naruto vanished. Kakashi watched as Neji leapt to his feet, sword in hand. Neji, it's too late. Neji's eyes grew wide as Naruto simply walked away. That isn't feasible. Naruto went a mile, so quickly. Kakashi nodded and grinned. He really is the son of the Yondaime. The aforementioned boy was using his Kekkei Genkai to leap miles. He needed to hurry. His chakra supplies had been depleted much more quickly than he had anticipated by the blast he used to destroy the crowd. With 20 miles remaining, Naruto let out a cry of exasperation and bounded into his bedroom. The last of it was that. He rolled onto his side and dozed off. Naruto awoke to find himself in the same location as when he had fallen asleep. He got up, stretched, and yawned before letting Hitomi take control of the body and performing a cage bushin. She gave him a slap. You moron. She let out a scream. You were almost caught. You were theirs. You would still be in Konoha being interrogated if you hadn't let half of your tenketsu go. To keep you from dying, I had to give you some of my chakra. With a sigh, he collapsed onto the bed on his back. I killed them all. Hitomi shook her head and sighed, it's like the windmill village all over again. No, it isn't. On this occasion, you were in charge. No, I wasn't. I needed to release that blast. I had to eliminate my chakra to prevent the village from being destroyed after it almost exploded once more. That chakra was completely out of my control, Hitomi sighed. You must keep in mind that your training is not yet complete. Although you can't, you will release all of your tenketsu. And we'll go take out Akatsuki when you do, she smiled. He simply let out a sigh. Let's head to the training room, please. They got up and went down the hall after he nodded. That always seems to calm you down. When they arrived, she gestured toward his sword. Take your sword away. There is no need for kenjutsu training because you have already mastered it. He nodded and slid it to the entrance on the ground. Now, until you're just losing control, I want you to start releasing tenketsu. He nodded and began to release them. Then, you're going to leave them like that for the next week. At less than 1/4 of them, he gazed up at her with anticipation. After giving a nod, she turned to leave the room. That concludes our day. To gain a sense of the chakra, you can train alone if you'd like. I feel a little peckish. She sighed. I've been stuck in your head for a month. He gave a headshake. The only drawback of having so much chakra was that, after you used it up, it took a very long time to restore. With a sigh, Naruto trailed after her. Naturally, he would return and train after breakfast. He took on a couple mercenary jobs during that week, which increased their income somewhat. Now that he was back in the bingo book, more people followed him when he left. He released roughly a fifth of his tenketsu the following week. Naruto spent that week training, primarily with logs, because he felt his control was eroding. He had only a third of his tenketsu left at the end of the third week. Naruto was incredibly anxious at the moment. What if, like the last time, he blew up again? He had only 3 weeks left in his 4th week. That was still a lot of chakra, even if he divided it up into obtaining a fourth of them this week and finishing the following week. Yes, I am aware that my math is flawed and illogical, but act as though it is. Today was the first day of a week. With a crazy smile, Hitomi entered. He scowled and threw his sword to her. Give me your sword. She grabbed the sheath. He scowled more deeply. Now, I'm going to seal this room with an anti-chakra seal. The direction of this didn't appeal to him. Additionally, you intend to release the remaining tenketsu. Until you can control them, you'll remain in here. But, no, you won't perish. She kissed him on the lips, lingered for a few seconds, and then sucked on his lower lip, saying, You're too strong for that. She licked his canines before reaching his tongue after he allowed her entry. They carried on in this manner for a short while before Hitomi withdrew. And you just received a good luck kiss, she said, breathing heavily. Naruto was as well. He gave a snort. When did you get lucky? That's it, with mock rage, she declared. I'm taking back my good luck kiss. She regained it after several minutes. She turned serious and said, Leave them. Now they were both breathing heavily. Before he felt them all explode wide open, he focused. He let out a painful gasp. It's excessive. He sounded out. No, that isn't Naruto. This is something you can accomplish. I can't take it. My chakra pathways are on the verge of blowing up. They're growing to accommodate the new chakra. Just persevere, he said, shaking his head. I'm getting out of control. Naruto glanced at her and said, Then hold on to what you have left for dear life. She chuckled a little. Naruto began forming a Rasengan to release some chakra, saying, I didn't mean to put a double meaning in there, but do that too. He was stopped by Hitomi. No. Don't dismiss it. You must learn to manage it without losing control. At least increase my weights significantly. He moaned, I'm giving you 5,000 and that's it. Come on, that might make it harder for me to blink quickly. More, please. She gave a headshake. He felt electric shocks that turned his skin blue. He let out a frustrated scream. I have no control over it, she let out a sigh. This is becoming risky. She began to leave, saying, I'm sealing the room. Naruto approached her cautiously. It hurt because there was too much chakra. However, he would never let her go. When he eventually caught up, he touched her shoulder. Please, don't leave me, he bellowed. She turned back to face him. I'll stay a little longer if you let go of my shoulder. I'm being electrocuted by you. He made a quick motion with his hand. She looked at him. He sighed, You didn't release them all. I was unable to. Anymore, and the pain would have knocked me out. Give them up. Are you in? Let them go? All right. Naruto reached the final 10. The fur on his tails darkened with each one he let go. The red was growing more and more intense. Eventually, his body was suddenly covered in fur, transforming him into a semi-full demon. Tenketsu 8 was that. His eyes went silver at 9. 10. All the blackness went out of his fur. All over his body, what appeared to be electrical sparks were bouncing. His chakra shook the entire cave as he screamed. Hitomi almost fell but managed to catch herself in time. "Seal it!" he shouted. Startled, she glanced up at him. "I said, seal it." In a different situation, she would have questioned him about who he believed to be controlling her, but this was a completely different matter. She rushed to embrace and kiss him, but had to quickly end it because of the chakra electricity. She bolted from the room. She made some seals after he gave her one last nod. With a loud bang that rocked the cave even more, a big slab of rock fell, covering the doorway. When she finally stopped on Dementora, she slammed her hands into the slab after continuing to go through seals. It glowed, and the black kanji for chakra appeared on the wall. An X then moved across the slab and eventually covered the kanji. That scream was still audible to her. Hours passed before it finally subsided. The cave continued to tremble. More than 24 hours had passed. But she was unable to sleep. She approached and placed her hand on the slab. It slid open. She gazed at the room in astonishment. Naruto was trying to adjust to all the chakra in the deep craters surrounding it. His chakra wasn't infinite because of those final 10 tenketsu. He would keep doing this until he eventually gained control. He was in the center of the deepest crater when she saw him. Still in pain, he ground out, "Hitomi. What's going on? I'm not running out of chakra." He will continue to speak in this manner for some time. "Your chakra supply wasn't bottomless because of those final 10 tenketsu." She smiled and said, "You officially have more chakra than me. You weren't prepared for that much power, so I sealed those and shut them down entirely. You had to experience what it was like to be limited. I'm giving you access to all of your chakra because I think you've figured that out." "Alright, gee whiz. Isn't that fantastic? There's only a small issue with that." Her expression changed to one of bewilderment, and she protruded her tongue in response to his irony. He couldn't get it, and they both knew it. "What? I think I'm going to die." He was blown off by another wave of chakra. She smiled and said, "And it's not getting any easier to control." "It will," he said, his eyes expanding. "I'm going to blow." "No, you're not. No, leave, Hitomi. If you don't leave, it's going to be the windmill village again." Her eyes grew wide. "Oh. That kind of blows up." She turned, hurried out the door, closed it, and put earplugs in. A loud explosion knocked her face off balance. She was thrown into the air by another one. The whole cave was rocked by explosion after explosion, but it never came to an end. If they did end, she'd be on the verge of panic. But because of her father's strength and expertise with seals, a seal had been applied to the cave, preventing it from ever collapsing. Probably that was the only thing preventing it from falling now. Then the blast stopped. She turned to face the door. She forgot that she was a Bushin and that she would have poofed away if he had been dead, but that didn't matter to her now. "No. Naruto. Come on. Give me another explosion, or scream. Anything." The seal glowed red as she stood up and was ready to open the door. When did they start glowing red? The entire cave was rocked by a huge explosion at that moment. The sound was like someone dropping a nuke in the adjacent room. The shock wave threw her away from the door, landing her with her back against the wall. As she slid down the wall, she thought, "You're lucky you can't control this, or you'd be dead." Yes, it didn't feel pleasant. She decided that going to her room would be the best course of action. The explosions weren't slowing down or becoming any weaker, and she was exhausted. 20.6 hours had passed. Hitomi rose and made her way to her room. When she reached her bed, she fell asleep. Hitomi became aware of something when she awoke. The blasts were continuing. She glanced at the bedside clock. She had 5 hours of sleep. She would never know how this child managed to be away for 30.1 hours. All she knew was that if he didn't stop soon, she was going to have an explosion herself. She yawned as she left her room. She kept going until she arrived at the training room, wiping the sleep from her eyes. When Hitomi looked down, she noticed some bowls outside the room on a platter with a small, sticky yellow note on them. "Later, I'll get this." "Naruto," she grinned. She looked around, but there was nothing to see. She put her hand on the door and hoped it would open. On her hand, however, was another sticky note. "I'll leave later." "Naruto," she snarled. "So he simply locks his sensei out because he's bored? Oh no, that is not acceptable to us." She halted at the library door after sprinting to the end of the lengthy hallway. A third sticky note was looking at the door. She let out a moan. "This isn't possible. It doesn't contain the method for removing the seal. Do not bother. Relax. You'll be happy when I come out, I promise. In a minute or two, the explosions ought to stop." Naruto, after a few minutes, The explosion ceased as promised. After finally removing the earplugs, she sighed at the quiet. At that moment, a surge of chakra filled the entire cave. She let out another groan. He had to make her very happy, or else he would fail. A fourth sticky note was on the end of a piece of string that had fallen from the ceiling. I will. Naruto, all right, that was just plain unsettling. With a sigh, she went to the kitchen and got a little bowl of rice for herself. She had to maintain her figure, but she would have had more. She might also put on a lot of weight for some reason. Hitomi became bored after finishing her bowl. Maybe as well. She walked over to the training room, grabbed the plate platter, cleaned them for him, and then took a seat at the table. Great, she was bored once more. Could she do anything else? Hitomi noticed the kitchen was dull as she looked around. She got up and began to move down the hallway when a string fell. Go to the library if you're really that bored. That should be enough to keep you entertained. Naruto, she let out a moan. This isn't possible. As she entered, she discovered a large Naruto blow-up doll. Take out your frustration on this, and no, the clothes won't come off. It's indestructible. Naruto, the string was torn from the ceiling by Hitomi. Oh no, why not? She let out a moan and slammed her fist back into his face. Owie. The doll let out a shriek. After staring at it, she started laughing. His eyes began to spin as his expression changed. She nailed him by swinging her foot up. It's not appropriate, he shouted, looking puzzled. A string fell. I told you would like it. That last shot, by the way, wasn't necessary. I'm very relieved that I'm not in his position. Naruto, glancing around, she laughed. What was he doing? Still coming in full force. The shockwaves hadn't even paused for a fraction of a second. I'm not in there at all. She heard an explosion and said, I'm in here, working myself into the ground. Oh, it was that exact moment. Naruto, she was totally disoriented. How was he able to do that? After realizing that the shockwaves had stopped, she hurried out of the library, hoping to spot him in the hallway, bruised and battered, approaching her. After the last one, I have to return to my training. It's not a bushin. Additionally, insert your earplugs. Naruto, then, through the cave, came the largest shockwave to date. As the explosion hit, she inserted her earplugs. Both of them were the largest yet. Hitomi ended up lying on her back, sprawled. Then a stone blast revealed that a chakra blast had destroyed the anti-chakra seal. She gaped in disbelief. Her seal had been totally overpowered by him. A figure stood at the end of the hallway. However, the silhouette had 10 tails, so it couldn't be Naruto. As she got closer, all she could see was black and white fur. The fur vanished along with the tails. It was her idiot who emerged from the dust. She glomped him while running. Kit. She let out a scream. He chuckled. Hello, Hito-chan. She stood up and dragged him along. She noticed something when she looked around the training room. No training room was available. It was only a pit. Despite having eyes enhanced by chakra, she was unable to see the bottom. Naruto stood behind her and laughed. That last blast was the cause of that. It will fix itself in about an hour, so don't worry. She gazed at him and said, I can see the dirt piling up down there. Is the bottom visible to you? You can't? She gave a headshake. Well, it's a few miles deep anyhow. So, how was that sticky note thing going for you? She asked as she turned. She was going crazy over that. It's incredible, this 10th tail. I'm capable of things I previously didn't believe were possible. I am able to act on my thoughts. Hell, with just my thoughts, I made myself a meal and had it delivered here. In addition, my strength has at least doubled. She was smiling by this point. I'm moving as fast as I used to be without my weights. You know, you were correct. She placed her hand on his shoulder and said, you did make me happy. Kit, you made me proud. He smiled. I could even consume a horse. We're celebrating by going out to dinner tonight because of this. She smiled. As she pulled his cheek, she remarked, ah, little kitty. Chan's first date. How adorable, he reddened. Let's go, she said, taking his hand in hers. They proceeded to the entrance before she intervened. You're a stench. With a protesting groan, he turned and headed for the shower. Go take a shower, then we'll go. They were heading out the door 10 minutes or so later. Quickly, Naruto used genjutsu on himself. He was once again at Hitomi's eye level, with gray eyes and black hair. He scowled and said, wow, you look ugly with black hair. I'm just being honest with you. They left the cave after she took his hand once more. After that, Naruto dragged Hitomi along as he ran to the closest village. In just 10 seconds, they arrived. I believe you pulled my arm out of its socket, dear lord. She spoke while making circular motions with her arm. He scratched the back of his neck and smiled. She kicked his shin and apologized. You'd better be, damn it. They left, making their way to the eatery. After arriving, they took a seat and placed their orders. How does going on your first date make you feel? Naruto reddened. Stop talking. Kitty. Shan is embarrassed, she remarked with a smile. Hitomi became very red. Poor Hina. Shan is deprived and desperate. Naruto smiled. Payback. Naruto simply snickered and said, shut up. What are you going to do now that your training is complete? She smiled and said, go after Akatsuki. How are you going to handle Itachi? She gazed at him indifferently and said, steal his bloodline. I can accomplish this by putting a drop of blood into each eye. I'll acquire the Mangekyo Sharingan skills. Oh, I assumed you meant to snatch his eyes, but I didn't mean that. What if Sasuke wanted to murder him? Naruto smiled. Itachi will sacrifice 3 drops of blood. He smiled and said, 2 for me, and the 3rd for the Shuketsu Kage Bushin who will be impaled with the Chidori. Hitomi scowled. Won't work, scowled Naruto. Sasuke is going to solve it. With his Sharingan, he will see a sack of blood rather than a human. However, Sasuke was never able to defeat Itachi. But you do. When would you like to depart, then? He scowled. A week? I'm too exhausted right now. He yawned and remarked, my mind is exhausted, even though I have boundless chakra and stamina. They received their food at that moment. After eating, the two departed. In just a few seconds, she was in the cave with Naruto after jumping on his back this time. Naruto popped his head into the training room as he walked down the hall. He looked down and remarked, I still have a few more feet. When Hitomi peered inside, she saw that there were, in fact, roughly 6 feet left. She turned to face Naruto again. At 6 feet, she was reminded that he was still at eye level with her. Will you ever make that unsightly genjutsu public? He smiled and let it go. She sighed and shook her head, saying, I apologize, I forgot I was wearing it. They kissed each other as they walked down the hallway and headed to their rooms. Naruto fell onto his bed and fell asleep quickly. In his bizarre dream, Naruto attempted to break the bagpipes with paper chopsticks while Hitomi, dressed in a kilt, played the instrument. He had just cracked open the bagpipes when he was startled awake by a voice. Well, Kit? He looked in the doorway after sitting up. There stood Hitomi, her face the deepest shade of red he had ever seen. It's unbelievable, but I had a nightmare. Would it be okay if I slept with you? Naruto made an effort not to chuckle. Even the all-powerful Kyuubi could be frightened by her nightmare. You're trying not to laugh, I see, with a slight shrillness, she said. It's not amusing. I apologize. He tossed aside the covers and said, come on. He tossed the covers over her as she lay down. What could frighten you so much? Silently, he inquired. She simply gave a headshake. When Naruto awoke the following morning, the bed was deserted. He smelled breakfast when he woke up. As he walked down the hallway, he noticed her preparing a rather substantial breakfast in the kitchen. What's the event? What? He inquired. She gave him a blank stare. It's your birthday, idiot, she chuckled. He scowled, but wait, it was July. No, it isn't. The middle of July has arrived. Hitomi started laughing uncontrollably at this point. Not funny. Yes, that was very humorous. She became very red. Just so you know, it's my way of saying thank you for what you did last night. He scowled a little. Letting you use my bed to sleep? She gave a nod. In any case, what exactly frightened you so much last night? A few minutes later, while she was setting the food on the table, he asked. She froze a little. I killed you in my dream, she uttered slowly. His gaze expanded. However, I tortured you first. I would carefully shave off your skin before chopping off the bone. His eyes grew even wider. You'd spout another one until you finally begged me to kill you. She would want to sleep with him for that reason. He got to his feet and embraced her. In her ear, he whispered, I'm not going anywhere. After eating breakfast, they entered the training area. At last, the floor had reconstructed itself. Hitomi shoved Naruto to the left as they entered, and she turned to the right. About 10 feet separated them when they met in the center. You're moving too quickly, to start. He felt the weights rise and fell to the ground, face down, saying, I'm doubling your weights. She laughed as she recalled the show he used to watch as a child. God, it reminds me of that show Nekoyasha, getting slammed into the ground over and over again. Naruto was sitting on his ankles when he slowly raised his arms and pushed off the ground. That hurt. As he slowly stood back up, she laughed once more. You're still interested in being the Rokudame? As he straightened up, she asked. Yes. Sighing, Hitomi became serious. Try and see if I can't fix that screwed up village. He simply waved her away, saying, Kid, you need to learn how to take on multiple S-ranked opponents. No, I'm all right. Her eye began to twitch. And you will be killed for that attitude. I'm giving that small comment more weight. She made his already ridiculously heavy body even heavier by adding a fourth of his weight. All right. He moaned under the weight. I'll do it. She used cage bushins to recreate the Akatsuki members. Every individual possesses the same quantity of chakra that they would typically possess. She smiled and added, Itachi even has the Mangekyo Sharingan. With a nod, Naruto drew his sword. Hitomi stopped him as he was about to disable some of his weights. Oh. He stopped when she screamed. She glanced at her cage bushins as he scowled and said, You have to keep your weights on. You could begin, she said, glancing at them. Knowing he would prevail, she smiled, but then a frown melted into her face. She needed to escape that seal somehow. She could stay and help him, which was fantastic, but what good was she if she couldn't enjoy some pleasures of the flesh or exploded after taking a certain amount of damage? A few months ago, she learned that she would vanish if things became, well, frisky. After a loud explosion, she was abruptly pushed out of the room and gaped at him. He stood suspended in midair. She was so distracted that she missed the fight, damn it. I told you. He smiled and added, and I would have even gotten my blood from Itachi if it had been a real battle. He smiled and extended his hand as she gestured toward the air. He pulled her out onto the air after she took his hand and said, Come on. When he let go, she yelled. But Naruto simply erupted in laughter. I condensed the air until it was solid using my chakra. It's completely safe. He sprang to his feet to demonstrate his point. Then he collapsed. In an attempt to grab his hand, Hitomi screamed and lunged. But she was given a shoulder. Naruto was giggling uncontrollably. She struck the top of his head with her foot. You bastard. She kicked his head once more and screamed. She grabbed him by the scruff of his neck, moved to an unhardened area, and held him over it. Give me a compelling argument for not doing so. Because I would survive, he smiled. She scowled and jabbed her toe into the air. It was incredibly sturdy. She let go of him and let him fall to the ground, saying, I hate you. He simply lay there giggling uncontrollably. Naruto abruptly stood up and let out a sigh. He said, I have to go right Ba-chan. Beginning to leave the room, she stopped him by grabbing his shoulder. She jerked her thumb over her shoulder at the seemingly bottomless pit and said, Fill her up. He let out a sigh. Doden. Jutsu no Udo Hito. After looking through a few seals, he said, Jutsu Earth Vomit. His mouth spit out dirt at a startling rate. 5 minutes or so later, the room was packed. The ground slammed down as if a huge block had been dropped on it from an airplane using his chakra. Hitomi could now see the bottom when she looked down. Naruto kept doing this until the entire room was occupied. What did that accomplish? If you had gone out there just as you were about to, you would have sunk. I was shooting soil and wet sand. He smiled and said, It would behave like quicksand. I crushed it into a rock. Oh. Yes. In any case, he turned and left after saying, I have to go right to Ba-chan. She sprinted to meet him. How about? Before I started killing everyone we despise, she wanted me to let her know when I completed my training. Oh. Before you send the letter, I'll read it again, she said. He scowled. Why? I don't want you to divulge any information. Like what? Where we are, who I am, our relationship, me, and the fact that the Kyuubi has escaped. Well, sort of. Remember, they already know. Oh, yes. He sighed and added, plus, I have no intention of telling anyone where we are. She gave him a menacing smile. Oh, Kit. Oh no, I swear I didn't do it. That is the issue. Huh? The issue is what you haven't done. You lost me. It doesn't take much, I said. Hey, your rent has not been paid. He started the rent paying after she tackled him. He was discovered writing in the library approximately 30 minutes later. Dear Tsunade. Sama, my training is now complete. At last, all of my tenketsu are open and operating at full capacity. My first target will be Akatsuki. I'll then defeat Orochimaru and return the special little Uchiha to the village. Sakura was pelted with a hog. Tied Teme if she enters the room screaming simultaneously in rage and joy. You'll be relieved to hear that it won't be nearly as difficult to remove the Anbu if they attempt to capture me again. Here, he sketched a dancing fox. Naruto P.S. I intend to assume the role of Rokudame. He sketched another fox with the Hokage hat on. Tsunade chuckled before ascending to the building's top railing. In her loud, talkative voice, she declared, I have gathered you all here today to announce my successor. The fox had snagged her right before she could deliver her speech, and his brief letter had helped her feel more confident for the moment. My successor shall be Uzumaki Naruto. She smiled as the Konoha village gasped and booed, stopping them with a wave of her hand. After he serves his dues for his crimes, he will take the place of the Hokage, as said in his father's will. The council members stood behind her, staring bewildered, and she took a scroll out of her pocket. This is what it says. She paused to contain her laughter at this point and said, I, Kazama Arashi, being of a, mostly, sound mind, wish for Uzumaki Naruto, my son, to become the Godem if he so chooses. If he is too young for that spot when its position is needed to be filled, I wish for him to take the spot of the Rokudame. This revelation stunned everyone, with the exception of Guy's team and Rookie 9. Naruto and the Yondaime were related. Not only that, but as father and son? How could that be? She turned and went inside after saying, therefore, Naruto will become the Rokudame when he returns. Tsunade laughed as she made her way to her office, the other council members following. We'll be overrun by the other villages. He's the village Dobi. There's no way he could keep us safe, exclaimed one of the council members. Yeah, he's just so weak, she said, laughing even harder, before throwing them the scroll of a letter that Naruto had sent, which the man opened and read with a gasp. The other members of the council laughed and asked, how can he speak so lightly of Akatsuki, Orochimaru, and Sasuke? We witnessed his last battle with Sasuke, and he was fortunate to escape with his life. Knowing that our Anbu members detested that small reminder, Tsunade smiled and said, so were our Anbu members when he came back. They lacked strength. He confronted Kakashi. He's growing older. He's only 20. After he defeated him, the demon did that. All right, then, describe how Naruto defeated 2 Akatsuki members. He lied. It's that easy. You can't possibly believe the stupid boy. He didn't even name us. He didn't have to. Jiraiya discovered that 2 members had passed away and that their positions had been promptly filled. The councilmen's opinions of this boy were rapidly shifting. The point is that Naruto is strong. I could probably activate my own seal, along with our entire Anbu force, our shinobi force, the villagers, and probably all of you. At the same time, especially if he's finished his training. According to Neji's report on the situation, all of Naruto's tenketsu were completely sealed. However, the note states that they're all open now, and on full blast, meaning that he had the ability to push chakra through sealed tenketsu. Now that he needs not use that force, he will be unstoppable. Tsunade stared at their retreating backs in disbelief as they said, if he ever returns, he will be executed. Find a new candidate. They really needed to turn up the volume on those hearing aids. Hitomi stated plainly, all right, so here's the plan. You and I have to go and destroy everything in sight before we take out Akatsuki. She scowled and he answered, I don't care how much you worry about me going in there alone. Akatsuki might have a way to extract you from a cage bushin. I don't like that idea. No, this is the plan. I cancel the cage bushin, go in there, blow Akatsuki to pieces, and then we move on to the Sound Village. This was it, Akatsuki's demise. Naruto left the cave, cancelled the cage bushin, and began to run, estimating that, at his current pace, he would arrive there in approximately an hour. As planned, he arrived in precisely 1 hour. Naruto stopped, sighed, and looked around, hoping that everyone was there, but there were no guards or anything. He stepped forward and entered the front door, which led down the stairs, into a cave that was similar to Hitomi's but shorter and smaller. In his opinion, he was relieved that he wouldn't have to walk half a mile to reach the other end of the hallway. He continued walking until he heard voices, and then he used his chakra to look through the wall and saw the remaining 7 Akatsuki members. Naruto carried out his plan by releasing half of his weight and breaking through the wall, instantly slashing Itachi across the eyes to stop him from using his Mangekyo Sharingan on him. As expected, he was attacked by both Kisame and Deidara, and Naruto began parrying Kisami's blows while shielding himself from Deidara with his chakra shield. You have a powerful Naruto. He grinned and plunged his sword into Kisami's shoulder, saying, you've gotten weak, Kisame. Kisame gasped in pain, switched arms, and threw Samahata to his other hand. That was the only pause he needed before slicing his sword through the man's torso and moving on to Zetsu without pausing. Kisame laughed at his conceit. Then his torso fell from his body and blood spurted from his mouth, and he was dead before he hit the ground. He reached Zetsu by avoiding the roots of plants and trees and quickly applied a demon seal. Kitsune Feiya. He screamed, leaving only a black mark on the ground where the thing had been. Seeing Hidan change, he severed his head and limbs before crushing his head under his heel. Not wanting to take any chances, he also set fire to Hidan, grateful that he'd done this before he could change. Naruto then turned to face the shadowed figure and slammed his foot into the blue-haired creature, and when he slammed his other foot into his head, it exploded in a pool of blood. Next on his list was Kakuzu, whom Naruto slashed down with his sword to remove the masks and the skin from his back. He then threw salt into the wound, temporarily relieving the man as his agonized cries reverberated throughout the lair. The clay bird was still bouncing off Naruto's shield when the leader said, "You would need a force unknown to anything in this universe to destroy me." Naruto laughed, realizing that the man couldn't take a hint. "I have it, but I want to play around first." Naruto then let go of all his weights and sent chakra to his eyes so he could maintain his speed, but as soon as he did, he realized something incredible. He had stopped time. After giving this some more thought, Naruto realized that he couldn't have stopped time by simply releasing the weights. As he looked around, he saw that he was moving so quickly that it felt like time had stopped. He took a step and almost screamed in agony, realizing that his body was suffering from the force of his movement, just like Lee did when he released his gates. Naruto tried again after adding a few hundred pounds to slow him down a bit. It hurt, but not as much. He ran in the direction of the leader, sticking a handful of senbon in painful places. He wouldn't be having children anytime soon, and he wasn't going to live anyhow. He walked around removing all the rings from the Akatsuki members' fingers. Somehow, the rings of the people he had killed were still in perfect condition, so he collected them, put them in a leather bag, pulled the string, and returned to his starting position, putting all of his weight back on. The leader let out a painful gasp. He laughed and said, "Betcha that felt good, didn't it?" He glanced at the other people in frustration and saw that Hidan was still alive in some way because his head was sitting up from the burned patch of ground beneath his stump of a neck. He took a syringe out of his back pocket and uncapped the needle before charging Itachi and stabbing his eye, causing his eyes to pop open and transform into the Mangekyo form. Naruto then filled the syringe 1/4 of the way, recapped it, and put it back in his back pocket. 5 people left, and it'll only take 1 attack to rid me of all of you, except you, Itachi. I need something from you. He sheathed his sword and said, "Now that that's over with, I'll give death 5 lives. The leader chuckled. "How precisely can you accomplish that without brandishing your sword?" He smiled and held out his shield to Itachi, who had stopped Deidara's foolish bird attack and was staring in disbelief. "I wasn't finished," he said, drawing his sword once more. "When I sheathed it, I dipped it into the darkest pits of hell. Now that I draw it again, it brings the burning flames with it." He put the sword by his shoulder and swung it outwards and across, saying, "Goodbye, Akatsuki." The flames were dancing merrily, as if they knew they were going to get to kill. He cried, "Shinigami Jigoujitoku. Death gods reaping." The black flames were burning a hole that appeared to lead to hell itself, and Akatsuki's screams were quickly muffled by the flames. Fire Country as a whole saw the explosion, and Konoha was in a frenzy. When Tsunade's door blasted open, she was laughing maniacally as the council members rushed in. "What is so funny, may I ask?" She pulled out a bottle of sake and filled glasses before distributing them, saying, "I told you Naruto would kill them. It's a time of joy. Akatsuki's dead." One of the members dropped their glass, but Tsunade caught it. The others drank deeply, relieved that the threat was over, and the door reopened to reveal a fox with a scroll, a leather bag, and a vial with a string through the cork. "These glasses are one of a kind. I only break them out on special occasions," she said, returning it to the council man. When the fox growled and snapped at the member nearest the door, he quickly drew his hand back and ran to Tsunade, who took the items from the yapping fox, grinned, and scratched its ear before the little fox purred and poofed into the smoke. The person who almost got bitten said, "Well, what does the scroll say?" "Tsunade, tell them to start sharpening their axes because I'll be back with Sasuke before the end of the month. I'm taking a day to recover before moving on to Sound Village. Sakura and them will have their other Uchiha back in no time at all. Oh, and you'll be missing a Sanin when I return too. The council is probably in a frenzy right now after that black light. It was actually fire from hell, but the same difference. Hitomi is going to kill me for playing around before killing the leader. She needs to learn to enjoy life." She laughed and said, "I've released Shukaku, who went to find Gaara. The other 2 were just released and returned to the demon realm. Tell those idiots of a council to stop screaming. I won't do that to their precious little village. Also, tell them that their precious Uchiha Itachi is dead. The vial of blood is proof. The blood came straight from his eye. I've set it so that once it's identified as Itachi's it will burn. Oh, and just try to use it on someone and see what happens. Naruto PS. Regarding engagement rings, I need your opinion." The council was clearly not pleased when she finished reading it out loud, and they hurried out of the room after placing their glasses on the table. Shizune and Sakura entered the room with worried expressions on their faces, and the Godem gave them each a glass. Tsunade snorted, and Shizune asked, smiling at her joke but still looking worried. What happened? They finally fire you? I wish. No, they said. They were terrified that the fire was a threat. Sakura said, that's why we came. Tsunade threw the scroll to her, and as she read the note and Shizune read over her shoulder, Sakura's face hardened at the handwriting. Sakura then burst out laughing. It was a few thousand miles away, and Naruto. Dobi defeated Itachi, Orochimaru, Akatsuki, and Sasuke while also starting that fire. That's a funny joke, but he's too weak. You heard about the Deizudeki? Sakura asked, nodding once more. You heard about him coming to Konoha and us trying to capture him? She asked. Tsunade stated plainly, that was actually Naruto. Sakura's laughter increased. She gazed wide-eyed as Tsunade lined up 9 rings, specifically Akatsuki rings, and said, this is a joke. It's got to be. There's no way the dumbass could ever. She turned back to the scroll and said, no way. And this, Hitomi, who is she? The Kyuubi. Based on the PS he posted there, they're pretty involved. She pointed to the fire that was still burning in the air and yelled, to Sasuke. He's mad. He's absolutely mad. He'll do that. Then, as if they were being drawn into a tube, a massive blast of ice shot up, freezing the flames in place. As she watched the flames go out, she exclaimed in amazement, so that's really Naruto. She hurried out the window as quickly as she could, saying, I'm going to find him. A member of the council ran in, beaming. Tsunade yelled at the man, she's not a nuke. Nin, don't you dare. He fled the room, his face displaying a mixture of fear and disappointment. Sakura pushed chakra into her legs to make them move more quickly as she ran. She was aware that it would be several hundred miles, but Tsunade had taught her how to travel quickly and far with nearly no chakra. He sealed the fire in a scroll, and Naruto made camp. Since she hadn't been able to hunt like a fox in a long time, Hitomi was quite pleased to go out and catch a rabbit. Naruto was setting up his house, which he had constructed out of wood and roots, similar to food. He was hungry. Since he wasn't in the mood to fight, he let his demon form show when he heard Hitomi outside and went outside only to see a shinobi headband flash. He then leapt into the forest. Naruto's tails and ears protruded as he felt the black fur spread across his body. Leaping behind the person, Naruto drew his sword and put it to the girl's neck. It took Sakura an hour or two of running before she came across a wooden house. She looked more closely and discovered that it was actually a tree root house, indicating that a shinobi had constructed it. When she noticed the door open, she leapt back and hid behind a tree. The door was open when she peered out from behind a branch, but nobody was there. She felt the cool metal of a sword against her jugular vein and windpipe as she emerged from behind the tree. She would be dead in a matter of seconds with a little more force. Have you come for a bounty, Konoha nin? Do you really think you'll be an issue after I killed Akatsuki? Deizudeki. Sama? Not daring to mention his name, she asked. He nodded, and she felt it. I'm not looking for a reward. He dropped the sword, sheathed it, and then took it out again. I have never even bought a bingo book. There were black flames burning it. Do you see those flames? Slowly, she nodded. These flames will burn your body and drag your soul down to hell if you're lying to me. The words sent a shiver down her spine. Naruto was no longer the naive youngster. It was certain. It's Sakura Haruno, Naruto said, almost dropping the sword but catching it. There's no use burning a forest. He pushed her away and sheathed his sword. Regardless of your strength, you pose no threat. Sakura growled in annoyance and slammed her fist into his head, saying, Why are you bothering me? I'm not going to get your precious Sasuke for another few days. I am not here to support him. Like Tsunade had taught her, she delivered her punch. Naruto didn't even blink, though. He didn't even move when her fist made contact. Exactly as I anticipated. He snorted, and I nearly wasted chakra putting up a shield. She blinked startledly. Never mind, I can't waste chakra anymore. How are you able to avoid wasting chakra? You would need a limitless supply. And I do, she said, her eyes wide. You're not a Dobi, are you? What inspired you to do that? Despite his sarcastic tone, his eyes shone a cold blue. You're unique. The year's understatement. I apologize. Why ought you to be? I forced you to leave the village and held you accountable for Sasuke. Instead of asking you to get him, I ought to have gone out and tried to do it myself. You would have perished. He would have pushed a Chidori right into your heart, similar to how he treated me. I was mistaken. You're not a demon. She sounded genuinely sorry. I just said that because I wanted to make you feel bad. I wasn't a demon. Take a look at me. Now I am a demon. The Demon King may one day be the boyfriend of the Demon Queen. After giving him a sharp sniff, she threw herself at him and buried her head in his chest, saying, "The title suits you." He began to rush at Sakura after spotting Hitomi emerge from the forest. Shaking his head, Naruto waved her away. She dropped the rabbit after sticking her tongue out and then returned to the forest, most likely in search of another. He turned his gaze back down to the girl sobbing uncontrollably with her head in his chest. He let out a small sigh. He had issues with crying girls all the time. Naruto placed his hand on her back and gave it a rub. Unsure of what to say, he said quietly, it's okay." She simply gave a headshake. "No, it's not," sniff. She let out a sob before continuing, "Sniff, I'm to blame for you leaving. You were kind to me. If I hadn't left, I wouldn't have been able to grow as strong as I am now. I was trained by Hitomi in ways that would have led to my expulsion from the village anyhow. In addition, they have been searching for ways to murder me for ages. I'm going to really annoy them when I play Rokudame," he said with a smile. She smiled at him for a moment, then took a step back and examined him. "I had previously discussed your height. But you've changed a lot," she said, reaching up to give him an ear scratch. He made an effort to keep from purring. He jerked it away when she reached for one of his tails. She lunged and grabbed on before petting it, saying, "Don't do that unless you want to make the all-powerful Daizu Deki purr. It's soft. Holy shish. You're purring." She chuckled at the contented expression on his face. Abruptly behind her, Sakura felt Hitomi's sword against her neck. "The only girl allowed to touch his tails is me. Stop it," she said threateningly. Naruto stopped purring as she let go of the tail. He pointed to Hitomi and said, "This is my girlfriend." She bowed. Naruto pulled his fur back. "Hitomi. Sama konnichiwa." Just Hitomi. Knowing that Hitomi would hear him, he muttered, "She almost killed me the last time I called her that." "Stop talking, Kit." "Kit?" She patted Naruto's head and remarked, "Ah, what a cute name." She withdrew her hand when he attempted to bite her. "Yes, Kit is a very adorable name. Dobi, may I use that name going forward?" A snickering voice said. He turned to see Sasuke and Orochimaru emerge from the trees. With a sigh, Naruto sealed his hand. The house returned to its underground location. "I assume you came for a movie and dinner before returning to Konoha in silence, didn't you?" Sakura watched in astonishment. How could he be so casual with them? Taking Sakura by the hand, Hitomi dragged her away. The fur and tails of Naruto returned. Claws sprang from his fingers this time, too. "All right, let's turn this into a sport," he said with a smile. Sakura gasped, fearing she was being pulled into this. 2 1-on-1 matches. Sasuke smiled and said, "I'll go against Orochimaru, then I'll go against Sasuke." "All right. But first," he waved Hitomi toward him. She approached him briskly and accepted the syringe he gave her. She inserted the needle into his eye while he held it open, injecting half of the syringe's blood into his eye before doing the same with his other eye. Naruto smiled. "Thanks to the Yondaime's blood that flows through me, which contains a bloodline, I now possess Uchiha Itachi's Mangekyo Sharingan." Sasuke gazed at him with wide eyes. "I get the bloodline, I take the blood from a bloodline." "How did you obtain the blood of my brother, just before he died, with a syringe?" Naruto said with a sadistic grin. "You're telling lies. How could you?" With his sword drawn, Naruto remarked, "Because I'm the Daizu Deki." Orochimaru smiled. "The Kuraikako Daizu," Orochimaru said, obviously making fun of him. "I feel honored to see it." "Hitomi." She nodded before vanishing in a cloud of smoke. "Sasuke, I have faith that Sakura will support you and that you won't attempt to murder her." He nodded and sighed. "She's dead if she tries to hug me. Deal." Sakura scowled at Naruto before moving to sit next to Sasuke. He took a seat next to her. He smiled and remarked, "This will be interesting." She gave a nod. Naruto turned on his new Sharingan and turned to face Sasuke. "Sasuke, don't try to imitate my movements. Even the Mangekyo Sharingan cannot duplicate them." Sasuke sighed and turned off his Sharingan. Sakura got to her feet. "And get started." She sobbed and leapt back to her seat next to Sasuke. Orochimaru smiled and gave him a 5. "Prong seal right away." Naruto merely chuckled. He smiled and said, "I'm not using her chakra," before releasing the 5. "Prong seal." With a growl, Orochimaru drew his own sword. Naruto took a scroll out. Before he proceeded to apply some hand seals and slammed them into Orochimaru's chest, he smiled and said, "I did tell Ba-chan I'd send her your head, but she didn't say anything about your body." He wheezed and then grew older. In particular, being 19 years old, later on, he would have to thank Kakashi for granting him those years. He chuckled to himself as he looked at Orochimaru. You don't age well, dude. That brings to mind, can you guess how old I will be? Guess what? The song, Jeopardy, which I don't own, began to play. Oh, 85. False. 12. What the? Wrong. I give up. Can you recite a good number of Melania? Orochimaru began to have a tantrum and screamed like a young child. Sasuke gaped in disbelief. Despite everything that had happened, Naruto was still stronger than him. It was clear that Naruto was merely having fun despite all of the training and effort. Sakura, who had forgotten he was there, was startled when Sasuke leapt to his feet. How come you're still more powerful than me? He let out a scream. Naruto became as icy as ice. My heart was pierced by a kitsune dog, which naturally produced poison and was filled with blood. My eyes, ears, nose, and esophagus were then destroyed, and my body gradually grew new ones in their place. This was following the replacement of all the proteins in my body with demon proteins. A few 100,000 pounds were then used to train me. Sasuke's eyes widened. And that was with my tenketsu sealed shut. They were all eventually unlocked, allowing me to access an endless supply of chakras. I almost died trying to get control of it, he said with a sorrowful smile. Sasuke gazed hatefully. Sakura, however, gaped in disbelief. All of that, merely to be recognized? They wanted to try to execute him after he had almost died? At that point, Sakura realized. Tsunade was at ease about them killing Naruto because of this. Since they were unable to, he was unbeatable. Naruto faced Orochimaru once more. You're dead, he said plainly as he put his sword away. It was blazing with black flames when it was pulled back out. Orochimaru smiled, believing he would survive. Now, if I activate the same technique I used to wipe out Akatsuki, everything and everyone in the area would be destroyed, and I don't want that for the fear of being redundant. Orochimaru exclaimed, Kachiyose. Edo Tensai, as one coffin emerged from the floor. The kanji for 4 was on it. Knowing who it was for, Naruto let out a gasp and removed his weight seals. Orochimaru completed the seal to restore the fourth's appearance, but since he was left without hands, he was unable to complete the seal that was required to remove his emotions. Or weapons, for that matter. You won't treat my father that way. I'm not going to fight him. Panting from the agony of moving without his weights, Naruto let out a roar. In terror, Orochimaru gazed. He hadn't seen Naruto move at all and had just lost his arm once more. Not even his movements had been visible to Sasuke. In what way did you open your gates without sealing them? Sakura inquired. Naruto smiled. Since I didn't make use of my gates. A few tons of weights were the source of that. The issue is that, even though I can move quickly without using weights, my body is under 10 times as much stress as Lee's. Arashi observed from a distance. He turned to face Naruto, realizing that he would simply be resurrected with no conditions attached. Hello, son, not now, Otou.san, he said, sheathing his sword once more, but this time it was silver when he drew it. This has not been tested. I'm not sure what it will accomplish. Orochimaru, you'll make a good test subject. He pointed the sword at the ground. Next to Orochimaru's neck, he held it. The heat it was emitting caused the man to scream. With a final sigh, Naruto allowed the sword to pass through the snake's neck. The audience held their noses as the air was filled with the stench of burning flesh. Naruto punched Orochimaru's head into a duffel bag next to Sasuke, who stood up to fight. That was the start of the real fight. The one that would record Naruto and Sasuke as members of Konoha in history. Do you want to go back to the beginning of this for the sake of tradition? With a smile, Sasuke inquired. Both of them were aware that one of them was unlikely to survive this situation. Naruto smiled. They both nodded, and Naruto picked up the bag containing Orochimaru's head before turning and leaving. To the Valley of the End it is. He turned back to Sakura and Arashi. We aren't waiting, so unless you want to miss this fight, I'd suggest you come. He then leapt into a tree and drove away. Sakura was right behind Arashi as he smiled and followed them. After they touched down, Arashi took out a scroll and hastily wrote something on it before extending it so that the writing faced the lake. Arashi rubbed the back of his neck and laughed. Ah. Excuse me, Yandaime. Dono. Sakura's throat tightened with breath. He resembled Naruto exactly. Call me Arashi, please. For me, Dono is a bit too much. What's that for, Arashi? Huh. He saw that she was indicating the scroll. Oh, it's a scroll for recording. One's own invention. Do you notice the circle in the center? He pointed to it as he spoke. She gave a nod. You can use it as a camcorder. The information it records is then written onto the scroll for viewing or reading. Wonderful. He gave a nod. It's beginning. She looked down and saw that it was beginning. She turned to face Arashi as a blue flash came into view. In case it becomes a bit too risky, she gave a small laugh before turning serious and glancing down at the two. Always trust a nice barrier. So, Naruto, are you certain that this fight is fair? You have an infinite amount of chakra, after all. If it were limited, mine would be on par with yours. Just to be fair, if you would. Sasuke left his sentence open. Ended. Using 2 fingers, Naruto poked himself in the stomach in different spots. We're even, but I'll release my chakra if you release your 3rd level seal, which I'm sure you've developed by now. Alternatively, I release my chakra on your 2nd level. It seems reasonable. As Sasuke began a Chidori, Naruto nodded and chuckled. Let's go. As Sasuke pressed his hand into his chest, he gasped, really, it's just like old times. You've improved your speed. Sasuke tore Naruto's heart from his chest and said, die. The sight of the still beat heart made Sakura gasp and gag. Before the heart stopped, the last of the blood inside it squirted out. Sasuke smiled. For fun, he performed a fire jutsu on his heart and said, you underestimated me. No, you underestimate me, Sasuke, Naruto said as he got to his feet. You could see the beating side of a heart through the hole in his chest. With a roar of rage, Sasuke tore it out once more. Sakura threw up her lunch this time. Arashi gave her a bag after swiftly pushing it off into the lake with the barrier. That was disgusting, they both said simultaneously, discussing 2 completely unrelated topics. This time, Naruto's heart grew back more quickly as he simply laughed. With a roar, Sasuke tore it out once more. Before Naruto snarled and pushed him away, he repeated this a few more times. It stops tearing out my heart and grows back, he let out a scream. Sasuke complained as he got up off the ground, I noticed. With a smile, Sasuke turned on his Sharingan. With a smile, Naruto turned on his own Sharingan. An incredible thing occurred after he infused it with his own chakra. Slits replaced the 3 colon-shaped pupils. Like Naruto's central student. Naruto smiled and remarked, the Sharingan no Za Kitsune. Sharingan of the Fox, a 4th slitted pupil emerged, pushing the other 3 aside to create space. More powerful than the Mangekyo Sharingan, and has. He turned it to the Mangekyo Sharingan no Za Kitsune and said, 4 pupils instead of 3. And a 4th wheel, snarled Sasuke. Despite having less chakra, Naruto was still more powerful, nearly too strong. What are you? Naruto chuckled, no mortal could ever become so powerful. The reason is that I am not a mortal. The Shu no Kyuubi is me. He laughed at the expression on Sasuke's face and remarked, King of Demon Foxes. With a growl, Sasuke stepped into his 3rd level seal. He spouted 2 horns from his forehead and 1 from each elbow. Out of his back sprang 2 enormous wings. With a smile, Naruto released his entire chakra. After removing Kusanagi, Sasuke created a Reikari. The electric energy glowed on his sword as he forced the 2 together. Naruto smiled. Okay, then. We're going to start with Kenjutsu. Naruto then produced his Deizu Kuraikaku. With a smile, Sasuke rushed towards Naruto. Blocking his blow, Naruto raised his blade. Naruto released a 4th of his weights and formed a demon seal with one hand. Naruto sliced through the horns on his forehead with his blade. When Sasuke swung once more, they grew back. After leaping back, Naruto put his sword away and then took it out again. Once more, it was silver. Will you murder me, Naruto? Remember, you have to get me back alive. He laughed as he spoke, but before he could finish laughing, his Reikari, Kusanagi interrupted. Naruto's blade returned to its typical black hue. Sasuke simply snarled and punched Naruto, who leapt aside but was stabbed by Sasuke's elbow instead. Leaving Naruto behind, Sasuke kicked him in the back. Naruto formed a black chakra Rasengan, aimed it at the still soaring Sasuke, and fired. Sasuke caught the black ball as it flew off and threw it back. Raising his hand, Naruto took in the ball. After catching himself, Sasuke charged Naruto once more, but he merely stood there. Sasuke blasted Naruto point blank after breaking through a few seals. Kaden. Enden Karyu. Fire Dragon Flame Missile, fire release. He went on for a few seconds. Sakura let out a gasp. Naruto simply stood there, unharmed, as Sasuke put an end to it. Do you want to give it another go? He then sent Sasuke to the bottom of the lake by slamming his interlocked hands into his head. Sasuke was within its grasp a few seconds after Naruto threw his tail into the water, sending him into the valley's side. Gasping for air, Sasuke lay on top of the water. Then he got up and charged Naruto once more, hitting Naruto in the stomach with his foot. With the help of his weights, Naruto flew into the Vally's side, creating a much larger hole than Sasuke did. Much like the red chakra did during their first battle, Naruto emerged with a barrier of black chakra encircling him. However, this time, the outline of 9 tails was visible, and the fur on his ears had turned black, with the tips turning white. With Rasengan at the ready, Naruto charged Sasuke, but Sasuke's Habitaku Chidori, flapping 1,000 birds, confronted him directly. Arashi swiftly enforced the barrier with a tiger seal. Sakura gave him a perplexed look. As the shield imposed itself, he winked and remarked, "This ain't gonna be pretty." Sakura gave him a quick glance before turning back to face the two boys. They fed it more chakra even though their attacks were equal. Given that he had an infinite supply of chakra, Sasuke was aware that he would run out of it before Naruto if he didn't figure out a way to stop it quickly. But just then, a spark flew from his Habitaku Chidori and struck Naruto's Rasengan squarely in the middle. The explosion that followed was identical to the one from their initial encounter. This time, however, they were both strong enough to stand up. Enough warming up. With his wings stiffening, Sasuke nodded, "Let's begin the real thing." When Naruto's demon form was released, real tails filled the outlines his chakra had created. Then a 10th tail's outline protruded, making space for his 10th tail. Sakura gazed in disbelief. In actuality, Naruto was the strongest thing on the planet. He arrived at the 10th tail first. He sighed at that moment. 1 second. A stunning girl appeared next to Sasuke, and his once solemn expression changed to one of bewilderment. "Thanks, Kit. It's quite dull to watch from your perspective." After saying, "I'll be over there," Hitomi leapt up the Vally's side, and Arashi let her in from the side of the barrier before extending it to cover the third body. "I apologize. She's been pestering me to let her out all this time," he sighed. With a sigh, Sasuke shook his head. He was a total moron even when engaged in combat. Sasuke snarled, "Let's just get this done." Naruto gave a nod. "Memories eat up similar to exposing the wound. I'm dissecting myself once more. Everyone assumes here in my room, I'm secure, unless I attempt to begin anew." It was time for Sasuke to launch an offensive. "So, Naruto, when they take me back, say you win, what do you think will happen?" Naruto gazed at him, his expression bewildered. "We will never again work as a team. Sakura will be left alone after they kill us both." Naruto snarled and swung a clawed hand at him. "I'd rather not be the one. The conflicts always decide. Because I know deep down that I am the one who is perplexed. You'll live, except that you're a Kyuubi." Naruto's eyes widened in recognition. "However, I lack those abilities." He kicked Naruto in the head, sending him into the water, saying, "So I won't come back, like you. I'm not sure what is worth battling for, or the reason I must scream. I'm not sure why I initiate and say what I'm not saying. I have no idea how I came to be this way. I am aware that it is not okay. I'm kicking the habit, then. This evening, stop talking." Naruto kicked Sasuke in the stomach, sending him flying, and he screamed. Sakura gazed in disbelief. Sasuke was correct. "They will not murder you. By claiming you had a valid reason for leaving, they will exterminate the demon. Their treasured Uchiha is you, the sole remaining Uchiha. Getting my remedy, I lock the door firmly. I make another attempt to catch my breath. I was much more hurt. More than ever before again, I was at a loss for what to do." Sasuke ran over to Naruto and shook him by grabbing his shoulders. "No, you're lying. It means that I'm the only one left. Uchiha Itachi has passed away." Sasuke gazed in disbelief as he said, "I killed him with relative ease. If he had no target anymore, what was the point of strengthening? I'm not sure what is worth battling for, or the reason I must scream. However, I now have some clarity, to illustrate what I mean. I have no idea how I came to be this way. I will never be okay. I'm kicking the habit, then, getting rid of the habit." This evening his eyes began to well up with tears as he said, You took my only reason for living. What should I do for the time being? What is my purpose in being here? To attack you and perish?" Sasuke let out a scream. Naruto snarled. Sasuke gave a headshake. Sasuke smiled, his madness evident. "No, wait. If I defeat you, then I've basically defeated my brother and his defeater. I will apply it to the walls, because I am the one who is at fault. Never again will I fight, and it ends like this." Naruto snarled at his folly. "You're a fool. Do you not get it? You never had the opportunity to confront your brother. You lack the authority to murder him. You killed me several times, But you don't understand that I can't die? He let out a scream. Then Sasuke came to a realization. Wait. I killed you, which implies that I killed my best friend. Sasuke burst out laughing uncontrollably. Naruto's eyes grew wide with insight. How could he have allowed himself to be killed by Sasuke? The colons of Sasuke's eyes changed into a huge pinwheel shape as his eyes swirled. I have one more flag left. You only have 3, smiled Sasuke. It will definitely send you to hell. I'm not sure what is worth battling for. Or the reason I must scream, however, I now have some clarity. To illustrate what I mean, I have no idea how I came to be this way. I will never be okay. I'm kicking the habit, then. Getting rid of the habit this evening with a shriek, Naruto pulled out his sword, cut through the seal, and took it off Sasuke's back. Naruto then took a scroll and used the heaven seal to seal Orochimaru's chakra and skin into it. He shook his head and sighed. Fantastic. Sasuke now possessed the Mangekyo. It was exactly what he needed. After picking up Sasuke's now dead body, he stood up and changed into his half-demon form, releasing his 1/3 demon form. He had no tail, but his long kitsune ears were still present. He tossed Sasuke over his shoulder and said, "Let's go home." After Arashi stopped the recording scroll, Hitomi picked up Orochimaru's duffel bag, called because his head was in it, and they left for home. As they ran, Sakura gave him a terrified look. "Don't look at me like that." He slowed down enough to match her speed and said, "I had to do what I had to do," mistaking her expression for one of rage. "I understand. I tried to reason with him, which is why I was harsh." "He deserved it," she said, leaping to the next branch and stepping a few inches away from him. He glanced at her bewilderedly before realizing what was wrong. "I frightened you." It wasn't a query. She gave a nod. "I apologize. However, a demon isn't adorable. Even Sasuke didn't frighten me. He is a demon, or at least that seal made him one. However, I have witnessed you in a rage. I've witnessed your anger. That's okay with me, but you weren't just angry, you were furious." He sighed, "Not to mention that you're the most powerful being on the planet. Or the universe. I understand. Knowing that little moron of a child has so much power now is unsettling. Furthermore, you appear no older than 16. How did that occur? When you left, we were both the same age. Do you possess Kyuubi powers?" He smiled. "No, I made a bargain with death when I picked up this sword. Prior to killing Akatsuki, I was completely unaware of it. No matter how many lives I give Shinigami Jigujitoku, he will deduct that many years from my age if I kill him." She gazed in wonder. He could remain a certain age without ever aging if this kept up. He would never grow old because there were so many adversaries in the world. As if reading her mind, he said, "But I don't want to kill unless I have to." He sighed as he noticed Konoha approaching. Naruto stopped speaking to her and began speaking to each of them instead, saying, "Time to face death. Oto-san, pretend to be anyone. I don't care who it is. Not me, though. I'm heading directly to Tsunade's workplace." He told Sakura, "I'll have to move where they won't see me, and coming in with you will get me caught." After both of them nodded, Naruto accepted the bag Hitomi offered him before shoving her away. He quickly sealed and took off at a pace that was too fast for either of their eyes to follow. Tsunade let out a sigh. For what seemed like an eternity, Naruto had been absent. Naturally, she was unconcerned. She had all the time in the world for now. She did, however, miss her Oni-chan. At that moment, the door opened and slammed, but the room was empty. She got up and glanced over her desk to see Naruto sitting on the floor, gasping for air. "The worst thing about being a noob.nin is that it really hurts to have to move that quickly, and I can't go anywhere without getting chased down," he said as he got to his feet. Tsunade smiled. "You know what? The council will attempt to murder you." Naruto gazed blankly at her apparent happiness. "Because of your kitsune blood, you will die, return, have fulfilled your obligations, and be free." He smiled when she threw him a tiny bottle of sake. "I have been in need of a drink." She looked at him bewilderedly. "Oh, by the way, I need to see the council." He raised Sasuke in a duffel bag. As he drank the entire bottle in one gulp, Tsunade smiled and said, "I decided against sending them because I would have been left with my head on a stump and someone else would have taken credit. It was roughly the same size as the one she accidentally gave Lee." She burst out laughing when she said, "They're in a meeting right now about what to do with you." Naruto began laughing and said, "Their best idea is to send a group of hunter nin, disguised as genin, to try and kill you, thinking you'll underestimate the genin." He then turned on his Sharingan no Za Kitsune and smiled. She gasped as she met his gaze. "How did you get it?" He assumed she screamed in delight and leapt over her desk to have a better look. She turned his head at various angles and opened his eyelids to look. I take it to be Itachi's? Naruto gave a nod. Are you able to perform Mangekyo? Naruto gave it another nod and turned it on. She let out a gasp. Fantastic. She retreated and turned to face the clock after remarking, it's like a four-bladed pinwheel. They will dismiss in 10 minutes. Tsunade was once again in full Hokage mode. Sakura entered with a cloud nin as the door opened. Tsunade gave them a startled look. Naruto smiled and said, all right, you can drop it now. In a puff of smoke, the cloud nin vanished, and the Yondaime took his place. Tsunade glomped him after gasping. As they struck the ground, Arashi let out a grunt. Tsunade, are you able to accompany me? He said, gazing down at her with a look of obvious amusement on his face. She appeared shocked and perplexed. He called her Tsunade, which shocked me and left me wondering why he wanted her to accompany him. She nodded, followed Arashi, and used his stomach to push herself away, causing him to grunt. Sasuke was still unconscious and would likely remain so for some time. Tsunade attempted to knock on the door as they ascended a set of stairs, but Naruto was quicker than her. Using his foot. The man who was yelling halted when he saw Naruto enter. What is the meaning of this, Tsu? What's causing you such anger? I knocked, but only with my foot. Naruto was smiling savagely. Tsunade was unaware of the moment when he displayed his kitsune features, but his fur now had a soft appearance. She wanted to touch it, but she forced herself not to. Despite his inability to speak, the councilman managed to catch the duffel bag that was thrown to him. These are the tools I use for bartering. They were still looking in disbelief at Orochimaru's twisted scream. Face, so they didn't notice Sasuke. I want to use it to lower my punishment. Tease. Tease. Tsunade. The man who was holding his head cried. Please tell me what this is. It's most likely a fake. Tsunade nodded and grabbed the bag that was thrown to her. He wanted her with him for that reason. Naruto smiled and said, I see you've lost all control of your fox. It's Grammy time. Oh, yes. Then Naruto pushed all of their papers off the table and placed Sasuke down on it. I lost control and had to go through a long hard sealing process that finally sealed it, but I can't subdue the features without a genjutsu. And here's your precious Uchiha. He didn't lower his head, and when it struck, it thudded loudly. You killed him. Someone from the top riser screamed. He's simply not conscious. Liar. Tsunade. Check him out as well. Tsunade snarled but hurled the head at the obnoxious lawyer. It's authentic. That is the melted head of Orochimaru. She pressed her head against Sasuke's chest. Someone who had been quiet up until that point in the top riser's corner said, and yes, Sasuke's alive. Was Sasuke the source of the chakra spike I experienced earlier? Naruto chuckled. It's encouraging to see that you made progress, Neji. I always believed that you would be an excellent member of the council. He wasn't the chakra spike, though. Neji smiled slightly. I kind of lost my temper and sent him a good few feet into the side of the Valley of the End. The start and finish are in the same location. How appropriate. I understand. Yes, you are one of the 2 noob.nin you brought back. You have essentially returned 3 S-class noob.nin. That is really amazing. I'll let you decide how you'll be killed for that. He immediately responded, I want an axe across the middle of my stomach. I don't want to be imprisoned in a cell either. I want to spend time with my father and be free to move around the village. Naruto smiled as another figure entered the room and said, your father is dead. Where do you hide your sake, Tsunade? There is a secret compartment beneath the desk. All right, thanks. He then departed, leaving the Konoha council stunned for the 3rd time today. Do you wish to reconsider that? All right. The lead man said angrily, all of your requests are welcome. I wasn't finished. Sasuke should be allowed to go. The lawyer nodded, saying, he'll be given back his status of genin, with no charges pressed. All right. It's finished. Naruto nodded, then picked up the duffel bag and Sasuke. Your execution will take place on the 15th at 3 o'clock. As he entered the doorway, he declared, I'm going to have Orochimaru's head stuffed and use it as a trophy. As she turned and left, Tsunade gave them a victorious smile. Tsunade turned to him to ask a question after they left the room, but Naruto, who was shaking his head, quickly pinched her lips shut before escorting her back to her office. He turned to her after applying his customary seals to the room. Could you reiterate that? I lost you, Tsunade remarked. Arashi's face hardened as Sakura and Shizune gasped, I'm going to be executed on the 15th at 3. That's in 2 days, though. Sakura stood up and cried. I understand, Naruto said, maintaining his positive tone. How are you able to be so at ease about dying? Because it will never happen. I will die, and then I will return. It's actually quite easy. What was the reason behind your desire to have an axe placed in your stomach? You spoke as if you had everything planned out. Naruto's expression hardened. I do, he said, pausing. And all you need to know is that I'll choose not to tell you because I'm not sure what you might do if I do. However, I need you all to pretend that I'm actually going to die. There is a very small chance that I will actually die, now that I think about it, he said slowly. Sakura opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted. Hey kid, you are aware that you made a proposal, correct? Several times. What? Everyone's eyes were fixed on him. This is Hitomi. When did you pop the question? Naruto's eyes grew wide. You can. Yes, they can. I'm putting myself forward. Tough, you don't like it. However, you have recently referred to yourself as king of the demons on multiple occasions. But that would imply that you are the queen of the demon's spouse. You're still a court jester right now. At that, all the girls began to giggle, but Arashi burst out laughing. Naruto's face was flushed. Shut up. Oh, it's all right, Kit. However, you still have a small issue with feigning to be my spouse. You're not, Naruto sighed, then struck his head with his fist, knocking him out. He got back to his feet in Hitomi's bedroom. All right, I'm here. I'm still not proposing, though. I'm simply not ready, he sighed. He was tackled by her. You should be in here, many thanks, Kit. He watched in bewilderment. For what purpose? No cause. Naruto sat up after 15 minutes or so. All right, I apologize for that. Until I went to see her, she would continue to embarrass me. At that moment, an eagle from Sand Village rapped on the window. When Tsunade opened it and extended her hand to grab the message, it passed over her and fell to Naruto before disappearing out the window. After reading it and breaking the seal, he burned it. It appears that Shukaku and Gaara have joined. Tsunade nodded. He's got complete control over his sand again. And it appears that Shukaku is letting him sleep this time. That is undoubtedly better. Tsunade nodded once more. All right, I'm finished. He caught the keys that Tsunade threw to him and said, I'm heading to my apartment. It has recently been restocked with food and is clean. Tsunade shook her head and said, of course, the genin had to file some workers' compensation after the mission, which was later declared an S-class mission. Even some of the Anbu were unable to enter. However, it had just been restocked and cleaned up yesterday. Naruto nodded and turned to leave, then turned back to face the room. Would you all like to join us for dinner this evening? I am capable of cooking. They all nodded. If you see Kakashi, invite him too. Arashi stood up and followed him, swaying slightly from the sake he had been sipping during their conversation. Naruto cooked his best meals that evening. Since Kakashi was late, everyone arrived, with Tsunade holding a string that was fastened to an awkward spot. They feasted. Everyone seemed in awe of his culinary skills, and they relished the reunion of an old friend. Oh, I nearly forgot, Kakashi. I owe you for making me feel old. Thanks to his relationship with Jiraiya, he was able to obtain a copy of the recently released Icha Icha Tactics book, which he tossed to him. Kakashi started reading it right away after almost passing out. When everyone had gone, Naruto entered his room and settled down on his bed. He slept quickly, relieved to be back at home. He got up the following day and prepared his own breakfast before growing disinterested. Yes, staying at home was monotonous and rapidly growing more so. Naruto suddenly had a thought. A short three-tailed fox appeared in his place after he released his full Yukai form. For a Kyuubi, it's short. Since it was too difficult to attempt walking on his back legs in this form, he remained on all fours, standing about shoulder high on the Ondaime. The rest of his body was covered in black fur, but his stomach fur and the tips of his tails were white. Naruto released Hitomi in her demon form after going over the seals in his mind. Despite the fact that they were both three tails, she was clearly the female because she was significantly shorter than him. Oh my, don't we look good today? While making a quick circle around Naruto, Hitomi had this thought, which then moved to Naruto's head. They both departed after saying, I try, with no intention other than to incite fear in the village. Adults were screaming as they walked down the streets, and one parent grabbed their child by the neck and threw them headfirst through a closed door in an effort to enter as soon as possible. The Anbu who were familiar with Naruto were giggling uncontrollably at the responses of the villagers. Tenten and Ino were instructed by the attorney to monitor Naruto's actions. Although they continued to use Junin because neither of the Kunoichi had desired to be Anbu, they occasionally received Anbu missions. At last, a child rushed up and leapt out Naruto's back. Naruto continued until the child tore out a hair. Tenten then used some kunai and a net to catch the child after Naruto howled and bucked him off. I apologize, Naruto said. It was difficult to hear, but it was there. Tenten nodded, placed the boy on the ground, and vanished after saying, He pulled out some hairs. Until they encountered Kiba, they kept going down the street. Ooh! 2 large foxes. Hitomi roared and almost tore his leg off, saying, "You must be dumb and stupid." To get her to release him, Naruto had to tackle her. Kiba stood up and hobbled around the two, examining them. He winked and remarked, "I can understand why a fox demon would love you." As Naruto snarled and prepared to complete Hitomi's task, Kiba raised his hands in a gesture of innocence. I am joking, he said, chuckling a little. "In any case, why are you two like that?" Naruto changed into a human and got to his feet. "Have you noticed the locals? They're going crazy. Since Hitomi instructed me to test my abilities in Auto Village, I haven't enjoyed myself this much." Even though she didn't actually allow him, Kiba was still alarmed. "And just who is Hitomi?" Hitomi also became human. "My name is Hitomi." "Oh, the all-powerful Kyuubi. It's a pleasure to meet you," Kiba said, bowing, his sarcasm blaring. With a growl, Naruto struck Kiba in the face with his fist. Before coming to a stop, Kiba flew through a good number of trees and into a nearby training ground. Naruto overtook him. "Don't be critical of me. I'm not feeling well." A few hairs were pulled out by a child. Kiba was simply resting on the ground. With a sigh, Naruto repaired his fractured jaw and several other minor wounds. Kiba sat up and gazed at him with wide eyes. "Plus, my execution sorta puts me in a bad mood." "You mean they still want you dead even after you turned yourself in and brought back Orochimaru and Sasuke? That is incorrect?" "No, you think? In any case, it's at 3 on the 15th. Come on over if you want to." After saying, "I'd suggest you do," he transformed back into a fox and padded down the street. When he eventually grew bored, he transformed back into a human. He had some ramen at Ichiraku's. He almost cleaned them out, in fact. Tucci sadly remarked, "I hear they're executing you." "Yes. And you don't mind that? I'm not going to try to flee or anything." "Nope." "Why?" With a sigh, Tucci dropped another bowl in front of him and said, "I have a reason." He visited the Hyuga compound to see Hinata. Just older, Hanabi was still a royal bitch. What a sweet youngster. As he watched her turn back, Naruto remarked, "She ought to be struck with a big rock." Hinata chuckled. On his way out, he discovered Rock Lee. They both lay on their backs, panting, after Lee challenged him to a fight. The sun was sinking after a couple more fights. He made the decision to see Sakura and dragged himself to the hospital. When she came to visit him, they somehow became close friends. It seems that she now has an office and isn't just running around. "Hey." When she recognized him, she said. Then, as she saw him more clearly, she moaned. "What did you do?" "Well, things kind of went downhill after I met Lee. Why don't your kitsune abilities help?" He rubbed the back of his head and remarked, "They had to fix a handful of broken bones in Kiba." With a sigh, she gestured for the shirt to be removed. She restored his damaged body when it did. "There you go. Where is Sasuke?" "On the other side of the hall. He only awoke this morning." Naruto nodded and crossed the hall with Sakura at his heels. "Hey, Teme." Naruto smiled as he spoke. Sasuke smiled. "Dobi. How are you feeling? Why was a piece of my shoulder amputated after I was battered across the Valley of the End?" "I was just wondering. In addition, why did the seal remain after Orochimaru passed away?" Sasuke scowled. "Because we have a contingency plan in case he passes away." Naruto nodded, demonstrating his comprehension. "I fused my chakra with the seal, and that made it stick. But once you took off the seal, the madness vanished." He sat up and looked at Sakura. "Plus, now that Itachi is gone, all I have left to live for is to restore my clan. Can you assist me with that?" With a growl, she struck the top of his head with her fist. "Following what I endured." He gave a nod. She gave him an axe kick in a uncomfortable spot. She turned to leave the room after saying, "I'll get back to you with my answer." Naruto was rolling. "Ah," he said, wiping a tear from his eye, "that's some funny stuff right there." "So, what's my sentence?" Sasuke asked abruptly. "You don't have one." Sasuke turned his head and looked for any hint of humor on Naruto's face. "They are able to murder their demon child, but they are unable to murder their Uchiha prodigy." He pouted and added, "I'm the Uzumaki prodigy." "You are the last remaining Uzumaki." Sasuke looked at him and then burst out laughing, saying, "I know, that's how I'm the best of the Uzumaki clan." Naruto burst out laughing shortly after Sasuke. Tsunade, Shizune, and Sakura entered to witness this scene. After simply shaking her head, Tsunade left to attend to the next patient. "Look, Sasuke." Tsunade's patience is wearing thin. His dumb joke caused them to erupt in fresh laughter. What is your sentence, then? Sasuke inquired. Death, at 3 tomorrow. Sasuke scowled. The head council man suddenly stuck his head out. Good to see you both here. I'm pleased to announce that Sakura and Sasuke have both been promoted to the rank of Sannin. Hey, how about me? Being the strongest creature on Earth, I could easily defeat both the old and new Sannin combined. Naruto said. Both Sakura and Sasuke gave a nod of approval. That's accurate for the next 24 hours. But we'll replace you after that. Isn't the way these things operate entertaining? Sasuke jumped out of bed and struck the man in the face. Sakura repaired the man's face while Naruto prevented him from causing any more harm. He turned and walked out of the room after saying, I'm assuming the seal is still acting on your judgment a little Uchiha-san. What did you do to my seal, by the way? Sasuke turned on Naruto and remarked, the medics can't get it to shut. Naruto let out a sigh. That was what I feared. The wound must have been burned open by my sword. Sasuke gasped as he tore the bandage off his shoulder, saying, I can fix it. He detested the gooey substance on bandages. Naruto tore a sizable hole in his thumb with his tooth, then bled into the wound. And just to answer your question, the only thing this will do is make you feel better. Sasuke sighed as the shoulder pain finally went away, but he gave Naruto a strange look as Naruto turned on his heel and headed home. The blood'll run its course, then you'll pee it out. After sitting up and watching TV, Naruto was waking up with the TV still on. He had 3 hours to live, according to the clock. He got up and took a shower in his bathroom. He only put on his pants and wore no shirt. Naruto did not want any of his shirts to be cut in half or to get blood on them. He noticed that he had 2 hours left when he checked his clock. He would not admit it, but he was afraid, very frightened. What happens if I fail to make it, Hitomi? Kid, you are now a complete Kyuubi. You don't need my abilities anymore. Naruto sighed, you haven't used them since you started training. I'm still afraid. Anyway, Sakura requested that I pick her up, he thought abruptly, attempting to divert his attention. He turned toward the door and went to the Haruno house. Her mother knocked, the door opened, and she called her daughter's name as she turned to face the stairs. Sakura approached from behind. Are you prepared, Naruto? Yes. How are you two so content? The elder Haruno nodded her head in Naruto's direction and said, you're going to die. Simply await the execution. You'll see. She gave a nod, and they proceeded to the town square. When they arrived, the stage was prepared. A large stump, against which an axe rests. Naruto lay down on the stump, and Sakura was given a seat in the front row. Naruto sang softly, Duty, Doodah, I'm going to get my stomach cut in half. Naruto, that isn't even funny. She gave him a shriek. He merely laughed. Shizune, Tsunade, Ino, Tenten, Lee, Kiba and Hinata, Tuchi and Ayame, Kiba and Hinata, and the other 9 rookies arrived next, followed by their senseis. At last, the executioner and the attorney arrived. They bound Naruto down after removing some shackles. The brown metal chairs were set out, and villagers began to arrive and take their seats. Sakura even witnessed one man erecting fireworks, and others had beer ready in celebration. For treason, resisting arrest, assaulting a fellow officer, attacking civilians, attacking council members, going missing, attacking the Hyuga head, and killing a Konoha nin, Uzumaki Naruto is scheduled to be put to death today. Really? Who did I kill? Craning his neck back to look at the man, Naruto asked. Orochimaru. What? That is awful. The bingo books contain him. He was in the book when the council member said, look in my left pocket, he's in the book. However, he was already aware of that. All the man wanted was for Naruto to appear worse. Naruto nodded and said, his punishment is death by a method of his choosing, and he chose an axe to the stomach. At least he was correct about that. The executioner rose to his feet and took up the axe. The executioner nodded as Naruto created chakra to reveal the seal. Now cut right across the seal. The man reared back and swung down as forcefully as he could as a drum began to play in the background. The axe struck the stump with a dull thud. With a cough of blood, Naruto said, thank you, sir. From the side of the stage, they burned his legs after removing his shackles. His half-seal glowed red at that moment. Orochimaru's voice, posing as Naruto's, rang out as he said, thank you, sir, for releasing Hitomi. A burst of red chakra rose from him in a pillar. A fatal blow to the stomach is the only way to free the 9-tailed fox, Kyuubi, also known as Hitomi. Naruto seized, then calmed down. In midair, the all-powerful Kyuubi transformed into a human after leaping from the seal. Then her chakra exploded, striking her in the chest. Fox ears protruded from her head, and all 9 tails sprang from her tailbone, along with her claws and canine teeth. She was standing there with a crazy smile. The only thing she said as his body glowed black before fading was, "Naruto, it's your turn." After Naruto let out a loud gasp, millions of white strings suddenly sprang from his stumpy body, twisting and turning to form the bones for legs. The muscles and tendons then emerged as red and white strings. Skin then developed. With a grateful expression on his face, he put on the pants that Tsunade threw him. Before his regrowth was fully complete, he put them on. He was a little unsteady when he stood up, but he soon got his bearings. Tsunade was standing beside him. "Naruto has made amends. All charges have been filed, the penalty has been paid, and he has passed away, albeit briefly. I am immediately promoting him to Anbu now that he has been reinstated as a genin. In a month, Naruto will succeed me as the Rokudame, and I will step down," she declared. In addition to being trained by Tsunade on how to function as the Hokage, Naruto had accomplished a record. Breaking 25 S-rank missions on his own, surpassing the previous record by 5 missions. Now he stood before the whole village, atop the Hokage Tower. "I promise to protect this village for as long as I feel like it after accepting the position of Hokage. After that, I'll step down and let someone else assume the role." With pride in their eyes, Arashi and Jiraiya watched as a general chuckle swept through the crowd. "But that probably won't be for a few centuries." He gestured for Hitomi to approach, saying, "I'd also like to do something right now." When she did, he knelt down and proposed marriage. She shook her head and smiled before responding in the affirmative. Sasuke put his hand on Naruto's shoulder and said, "Naruto, stop worrying so much. She's known you your entire life. If she was going to walk out, she would have done it by now." Naruto waited after nodding. Naruto was prepared to get wed on the day of his and Hitomi's wedding. Naruto's body went rigid as the music began, and Sasuke was Naruto's best man. In some way, Jiraiya, Arashi, and Guy had become priests. Naruto was still unsure of how that occurred. There should have been just one. They were also expected to be priests. "All right, Naruto," Arashi turned to face his son and spoke. "Are you considering this woman to be your spouse?" "I do." "Do you consider this stylish young man to be your spouse, Hitomi?" Guy inquired. "I do," she declared. "A bride's hot babe may be yours to kiss," Jiraiya declared. After giving the 3 of them a fierce look, Naruto was drawn into a kiss in which mothers covered their kids' eyes. In order to later use this as blackmail against Naruto, Kiba was recording it. But this was something Hitomi was relishing. It was a brilliant idea to have a marriage where you had to kiss to be married. This was created by incredible humans. After a minute or two, Arashi removed the notebook from Jiraiya's hands and cleared his throat loudly. They walked back down the aisle after Naruto smiled. Sasuke whispered to Naruto, told Ya. Hitomi attracted everyone's attention at the subsequent party. "I need to make an announcement. This Naruto will soon become a father." At this, everyone clapped and yelled. But Naruto screamed like a little girl and instantly passed out. Kiba continued to be blackmailed. As they both burst out laughing, he said to Hinata, "The great Dezudeki just squealed and fainted." They were relieved that Naruto had not had the opportunity to get anything on them during their ceremony because they had already experienced this. When Naruto did it again after waking up and learning they were expecting twins, Kiba laughed even harder. A girl and a boy. Later, Naruto approached Sasuke and discovered him making out with Sakura. Additionally, it appears that the Uchiha clan will soon begin a new chapter with another wedding. Naruto spun around and confronted Hitomi. She told him, "I think they've got the right idea," prior to confronting Naruto. A week or so later, Naruto had to wake up alongside Hitomi, who was currently leaning over a toilet and throwing up. She whispered to Naruto, "I detest kids," before heaving over the toilet once more. Naruto simply let out a sigh and kept massaging her back in an attempt to soothe her. Since Naruto hadn't gotten around to setting up the TV and Hitomi was determined to force him to do it, they sat on the couch after she had finished throwing up, doing nothing but enjoying each other's company. "So, how long until?" He coughed a little. "I give birth." Hitomi laughed when Naruto made a little squeak. "Kyuubi's takes a year to complete." Naruto simply nodded. The additional 3 months are spent getting their kitsune features. In an attempt to eliminate the awkwardness, she exclaimed, "And set up the TV, damn it." He simply nodded once more and stood up, making his way to the cable box. At least 100 attempts on Hitomi's life occurred over the course of the following few months, but each assassin was killed slowly, and their bodies were hung by the ankles from the front gate to symbolize what would happen to the assassins. Naruto declared war after learning that the mist was responsible for the assassins, and he returned a week later, with the Mist Continent literally wiped off the map. Not even a piece of land remained. And Hitomi, Jiraiya, Arashi, and Naruto had all taken up residence in the Uzumaki compound after Naruto became Rokudame. At the moment, Naruto was running around squealing, Hitomi's water had just broken, and Sasuke and Sakura were at their house. Sakura promised to deliver the two, and Sasuke was there to provide moral support. For Naruto, he was freaking out more than Hitomi, who appeared to be perfectly calm, and he finally punched him because he wouldn't stop. Later, they switched off, and Naruto held a baby boy and Hitomi held a baby girl. Both had kitsune ears, claws, extended canine teeth, and a tail. They grew up as normally as possible for a shinobi, with the girl named Ren, Water Lily, and the boy named Jiro. Naruto had two swords forged, one like Hitomi's for Ren and one like his own for Jiro. Naruto would return home bruised and beaten, claiming that his healer was flawed because it always wore out after resetting a few broken bones. The story of Uzumaki Naruto and Uzumaki Hitomi thus ends, and it does so in a happy way.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.